Chapter 1813. Cenarius had tried to test Xueqi's ideas, but at the end of the day, it was all because Xueqi had caused too much trouble back then. He had blown up Chief Saw's nest, and he was in the limelight. The mortals from back then were dead. But what about the rest? More than half of the wilderness demigods had died, some famous, some not. In the end, they had all been taken advantage of by Xueqi. Could they feel better? Especially Cenarius, who had lost his father. Back then, his father's neck had been broken by Archimonde to save Cenarius, and he had died a heroic death. Even if it had been 10,000 years, it was understandable for him to be angry. Thinking of this, Xueqi's thoughts were clear. Some things were better to be exposed in advance. If that knot in the heart continued to develop, it might become a soul-devouring monster. At the end of the day, Senna was afraid of being betrayed by Xueqi a second time. Phew! Xueqi let out a long breath. Let's all look forward. Since you've all been resurrected, and now you're allies fighting for the same goal, just pretend that you've forgotten what happened in your previous life. This pretend that you've forgotten was really clever, and the facial muscles of several alliance bigwigs twitched secretly. Xueqi was clearly telling Cenarius. It doesn't matter if others believe it or not, you have to believe it first. Xueqi pulled the burly Lord Howl over and said to Cenarius, since you're in this group, you're giving your back to the other party. Grom, are you willing to give your back to Cenarius? Lord Howl was an honest man, and he didn't hesitate. I cut you back then because I was a tribal warrior. Now I believe you because we have a common enemy. I won't apologize. If you're unhappy with me, we can fight again after the war. Let's fight if we're real men. That was what Lord Howl meant. Cenarius's eyes almost rolled back in his head. In fact, there were many kinds of gods. The ones most known to mortals were, of course, those with the ultimate killer moves. For example, the white deer god Malorn had the famous body of the white deer. His body shone with a pure and holy white light that could directly turn low-level demons into ashes and blind high-level demons. In a sense, it was the combination of a long-lasting flash grenade and Ashbringer. Unless it was a high-grade void overlord or one of the army's 3 heavyweights, any demon could be trampled to death by Malorn's hoof. Another example would be Elune, the demigod's mother. Although she rarely made a move, one could tell how powerful she was from her priests, Starfall. There was nothing Starfall couldn't deal with. If there was, then he would use 2. If there were more, then there would be no end to it. In any case, the world would be bombed until the nuclear core was flattened. But Xueqi had heard of a legend that when gods gave birth to a child, they would split their divinity and fuse it together to bestow a child. After splitting the divinity, he wouldn't have that power. So whether it was because Malorn and Elune were stingy or something else, mortals thought that Cenarius could fight, carry, and heal. In fact, Xueqi, who was familiar with history, knew that Cenarius was a relatively rare support-type demigod. Thorn Halo, Entangling Roots, Tranquility. He didn't even have a single attack skill that he was best at. They were all support-type or healing-type. If he really had to fight Lord Howl, who had returned to his peak, it would be a pity that he couldn't just use half an axe. In the past he had used 1 axe to cut him, and now it was still 1 axe. This kind of tragedy of being killed with 1 axe. Sigh, talking about it would make one cry. Cenarius's mouth moved for a long time, but he still couldn't let out a fart. Xueqi knew that he was in despair. Anyway, looking at Cenarius's constipated expression, Xueqi felt really good. Cenarius admitted defeat, and Xueqi took the lead. There was no need to chase after him. After all, they were in the same trench. Xueqi said calmly, I have personally witnessed the power of the Burning Legion, which is why I have sacrificed the environment to improve the industrial level. However, I will seriously consider the idea of sustainable development. What was sustainable development? Cenarius was dumbfounded, but it sounded pretty good. The doctrine of nature hated mortals who abused natural resources and destroyed trees that could be left for future generations. Now, with Xueqi's sustainable development, he was immediately hooked. He looked around and found that they were in enemy territory. They had actually wasted a lot of time just now. If not for the fact that the patrol leaders were on their side, something might have happened just now. All right, when we go back, I will find you to listen to the idea of sustainable development. Now, let's deal with the enemies first. I will listen to your instructions, Cenarius said. Xueqi narrowed his eyes. Actually, these enemies are far from that troublesome and can be dealt with quickly. Leave the dragon web mother to me. I will go show my new subordinates my strength. The Alliance heroes come with me. As Xueqi spoke, he glanced at the fire demon hunter Shanox, who hurriedly lowered his head, and then said, "The Bear Brothers and Avina will deal with Lord Leolis. The rest of the demigods will deal with Gatekeeper Belloc." Understood. The main force split into 3 groups and set off. As a true fire elemental plane, the first reaction of mortals when they walked here was heat. It was heat that transcended time and space. There was a limit to the cold. At the very least, under normal circumstances, there was no such thing as cold that exceeded absolute zero. But there was no limit to the activity of molecules, so the temperature could be thousands of degrees, or even tens of thousands of degrees. Even though Xueqi used the ice shield to cool the air, and the temperature had even seeped into the ground to offset the high heat from below, the mortal heroes could still feel the terrifying heat from the core of the land as they walked on the surface of the land of fire. They felt like a live fish that was being fried over a fierce fire. Even though they knew that they would still die if they flipped over, they could not help but jump around. Sigh. Xueqi sighed softly. An ice bridge appeared out of thin air for the mortal heroes to walk on. Whoosh! I'm alive! Imriel, who had not participated in the battle at the molten core, was still as lively as ever. I thought my skin was going to be burned by my own armor. Xueqi slapped the back of his head with his hoof. Idiot, you're cool. It's my own frost circuit that consumes the magic power. Then why did you bring us here? The hoof was a little puzzled. Can't you just rely on those demigods? Xueqi spoke the truth. There will be a battle between me and Ragnaros, but I don't have much time to deal with those fire elemental creatures that jump out. Demigods from the wilderness will have their battle prowess greatly reduced in this place. The only good thing was that Xueqi and the others did not need to clear the monsters on the road. Chapter 1814. In World of Warcraft, there was a story that not many players knew about. If the players got the Ashbringer from the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse in Naxxramas, when they returned to the Scarlet Crusade with the Ashbringer, all the Scarlet Crusade NPCs would turn from hostile to friendly when they saw the players. Then, they would kneel to the players one by one. That was an unforgettable scene. Xueqi had never imagined that he would have this privilege one day. For example, he had subdued the Kiraj bug people of on Kiraj. But in front of the big shots of the Alliance, he didn't do this kind of thing that would make him look good. What appeared in front of everyone now was a one-sided scene. The whole land of fire was full of traces of fierce battles. It looked like the Alliance had sent 1,000,000 soldiers to plow the entire land of fire. The high-energy fiery red wrist guards that occasionally scattered on the ground were the minions of a certain lava monster when it was alive. This monster that could split into countless little burning men was quite difficult to deal with. One mistake could wipe out the whole team. It was like a pile of scattered rocks. If the players couldn't sense the fire elements emitting from the rocks that were purer than the fire elements on the scorched land, they wouldn't have imagined that it was a terrifying 5-story tall lava giant. Molten Fire Lord. It was a pity that all their glories and their possibly glorious history had vanished with the betrayal of the Fire Goblin clan. The fire demons were the most intelligent among the fire elemental creatures, and their betrayal was fatal to Ragnaros. Perhaps the fire demons weren't the most powerful individually, but they were highly intelligent and knew how to cooperate. As the patroller and sentinel of the Land of Fire, their betrayal made Ragnaros blind and deaf. The Land of Fire was the gathering place of fire elemental creatures. These fierce-tempered creatures fought all day long, and it would be abnormal if tens of thousands of fire elemental creatures died every day. Ragnaros didn't care because the special geographical environment of the Land of Fire would give birth to more fire elemental creatures. Like raising poisonous insects, the fire elemental creatures would select the more excellent and powerful fire elemental creatures through constant battles. Ragnaros only wanted to enslave the most powerful of them. In this situation, the fire demon army planned to eliminate all the obstacles on the way to the 3 leaders. In order to please Xueqi, the former manager Majordomo even ordered the fire demons who were free to help clean up the battlefield. Asking the fire demon, who had no combat mission, to run to the 2 sides of the road was both to point the way for Xueqi and to flatter him. X greets the Supreme Lord of Flames, Duke Marcus. Almost all of them used the same tone. The fire demons did not speak the common tongue but a very ancient elemental language that could only be understood by the mortals in the Dark Imperium. Most of the Alliance experts didn't understand, but at least one of them did. He was the former elven Prince Kale, that Sunstrider who had followed Duque here. As one of the witnesses to Duque's rise, Kale was envious, but more than that, he was grateful. If it weren't for Duque's protection, he might have already been running on the dark path of depravity and never to return. This was real. In order to weaken the Sunstrider family's influence among the High Elves, Queen Sylvanas could directly accuse him of treason, which was not considered a slander, and give him a hat that could never be washed away. He could only associate with people like Illidan. Duque once told him in a casual conversation, "I heard Nosdormu say that in parallel worlds of different spacetimes, there will be different versions of you. If you were in another timeline, you might be the villain." Although it was a joke, Kale was very attentive. Now that he was the chairman of the Kirin Tor Parliament of the Dalajan, he had long felt his limits. If he was still the prince of the previous dynasty who had nothing to ask for, of course, he could just muddle along. However, Sylvanas became a demigod, and then Magni turned himself into a diamond man in order to break through to the demigod realm. This stimulated Kale's nerves. He vaguely felt that his path to ascension was here and now. Duque, who had planned earlier, had already controlled everything here in advance. As long as Duque defeated Ragnaros, he would become the true master of the Land of Fire. Duque was a hurdle that Kale could not avoid. Facing Duque, the kind-hearted Kale could not have any evil thoughts, so he secretly made a decision. On the other side, surrounded by hundreds of fire demons, Duque and his group were like an emperor on an inspection tour. They majestically arrived at the place where the mother of Ghost Web Spider was. The sky was dark, and hot black ashes were swirling everywhere. The closer they got to Bestelac's place, the easier it was to see the white spider webs entangled in the rubble and on the roadside. Ordinary spider webs could not exist in such a high-temperature environment. They would have long turned into an unknown burnt substance. Only the flashing flames and the cobwebs made of ultra-pure fire elements could exist in this special world. Spiders were the most sensitive creatures. Every vibration of their webs would be sensed by their sensitive tactile nerves. They could easily distinguish which vibrations came from the natural wind, which were prey and which were enemies. Faced with a large number of fire demons, the mother of Ghost Web was a little confused. A mysterious female voice echoed in the spiritual sea of all the visitors to Duque. It was a sinister voice. "Shane, Nox, are you out of your mind or something? This is not a place for you and your long-tailed subordinates. Don't say I didn't warn you. If you go any further, don't blame me for feeding your subordinates to my children." Susa. The first half of the conversation was normal, but after the mother of Ghost Web Spider's strange perception system sensed someone, Major Domo. Damn it! You betrayed the great master Ragnaros. The mother of Ghost Web Spider screamed, followed by her exclamation. Thousands of small spiders suddenly emerged from the seemingly empty cracks in the surrounding rocks. There were so many of them that in less than 3 breaths, they filled the entire field of vision of the Alliance heroes. The dark ground with a dazzling red light was suddenly filled with these 8-legged creatures. The long furry legs and the mouthparts that made zzzz noises made the heroines of the hero group shudder. Be careful of the yellow-green legs. They will self-destruct. Chapter 18:15. Shaynox began to play the role of Duque's underling and reminded them beforehand. 4 fire elemental creatures like fire demons. Damage caused by fire elements and explosions was ineffective against them. For mortals, however, it was a different story. They were like walking bombs. But it didn't matter. Duque didn't bring so many of his underlings here just for decoration. The 2 night elf archers were the first to attack. Tyrande and Chandries were the best archers on the planet when they knocked their arrows. When the Windrunner sisters were here, Tyrande was more of a priestess in order to maintain the balance of the team. When the team needed long-range attacks, these masters of 2 professions would immediately switch to the profession that the team needed the most and pour fire into the distance. The arrows tore through the burning air and accurately nailed the yellow-green spiders. The nightmare web nest beetles, which had been programmed to self-destruct as soon as they touched an enemy, faithfully carried out their mission of self-destructing soldiers. Bang, bang, bang. They exploded, but unfortunately, they only blew up their own kind, the other nightmare web spiders. It wasn't just the archers who attacked. Kale also launched an attack. The arcane flames circling above his head began to rain out sparks. At first, the sparks were only the size of a pinky, but after absorbing the fire elements in the air, they quickly turned into small fireballs the size of bowls. These small fireballs were not to be underestimated. Every single one of them that hit a group of spiders was enough to blow them up into the sky. Broken limbs and broken legs flew all over the place. High-level mysteries crushed low-level mysteries. High-level fire elements easily devoured low-level fire elements. As a powerful mage who had merged with his phoenix and barely reached the level of a demigod, Kai Zi's strength was unquestionable. After the few long-range attackers showed their power, the remaining melee or long-range attackers became a little bored. Edwin Van Cleef still held 4 daggers in his left hand, ready to throw them at any moment, but he was clearly a little relaxed. The funniest thing was Hoof, who waved the huge divine axe, Flame Joy, and eagerly showed everyone the power of the divine weapon. Since it was already Flame Joy, and not Shadow Sorrow, it was only a matter of time. The divine artifact's ability to absorb fire elements had also changed. It was rare that the fire element here was so rich. His hooves could easily accumulate enough energy without slashing anyone. Then, he would pour all the fire energy in the divine artifact out. Walala! With a wave of his hand, a wave of fire appeared. The ultra-high purity flame wave was like a bulldozer, flattening everything in front of the flame wave. Whether it was a spider or a spider web, there was only one result: ashes. Tyrion Fordring stared at the scene with wide eyes. This kind of lethality was already comparable to the Ashbringer. It was just that every attack of Ashbringer consumed a large amount of holy light. Even with the enhancement of the artifact itself, the burden on the user's spiritual power was still not small. Alas, the hoof didn't even need to expend its energy to absorb the energy around it. The fire elements surged into the divine weapon on their own. This was a powerful move that consumed almost no energy at all. What the F***CK is infinite light cannon. This was simply a map cannon. If the spiders could speak and complain, they would definitely say, "Oh my god! There's a German girl who's cheating." Of course, Imriel's performance did not last long before it was over. The mother of Dragonweb Spider said, "Learn more about elemental domination," and the hoof was finished. Divine artifacts were inanimate objects after all. They may have their own simple will, but they were ultimately the effects of tactics set by their creators in advance. When a real demigod began to dominate the surrounding elements, and you could not compete with the other party for elemental domination, it was inevitable that you would die. Hoof, you could ask her to generate electricity like a generator and produce holy light as an energy source. This was not a problem. However, it was difficult for her to control the fire elements that she could not control. All of a sudden, Flame Joy was silent. Hoof was like a child whose favorite toy had been taken away. She looked so sad that she almost cried on the spot. Duque rolled his eyes at her. Only then did she stick out her little tongue and restrain her emotions. The group slowly advanced to the nest of the mother of Dragonweb Spider. It was a very strange place. Strictly speaking, it was a semi-open structure. A few huge and steep rocks pierced straight into the chaotic, scorching sky. On these rocks, which were probably no taller than 10 stories, was a huge red and yellow spider web. Looking up from the bottom, one could clearly see a huge spider-like creature hanging upside down from above. Although she also had 8 legs, strictly speaking, under her glowing yellow abdomen, only 6 of them were functioning. The 2 front legs were more like hooks, because these 2 forelegs were inlaid with grayish-black metal armor. It was conceivable that the mother of Dragonweb Spider would use these 2 hook-like forearms as scythes to harvest the lives of its enemies. The mother of Dragonweb Spider should have compound eyes like flies. Unfortunately, her eyes were full of flames that kept spurting out, making it impossible to see her face clearly. However, Duque was not interested in her body shape. Beside him, Executus swayed his red snake tail and stepped forward to shout, "In front of you is the new master of the Land of Fire who once defeated Ragnaros, the great demigod of the Weave, Duke Marcus. He will soon become the supreme ruler of this scorching land. Betelak, if you know what's good for you, hurry up and greet your new master, so that you and your soul can avoid the fate of destruction in the next purge." Before Executus could finish, Betelak had already sneered. "Ha ha ha. Great. I have 8 legs, but I will not bend even one of them for this puny human demigod. I am me. I only care about the growth of my children. You fire demons are all shameless traitors. Don't compare me to you." Major Domo shrugged, and the long black spikes on his shoulders swayed like a forest of spears. "Then there's nothing to say. Very well, I have no idea that you will submit. Then let me make you the first sacrifice for the great master to rule this land." With that, Executus turned around and bowed deeply to Duque, who was many times smaller than him, and then retreated to the side. Bestalac screamed, "Children! Come out! It's time to eat." As her voice fell, more than a dozen giant spiders the size of tanks suddenly broke through the stone walls and surged over from all directions. Dragon net worker bug? Even Sean and Nox frowned. These giant bugs were definitely not easy to deal with. Chapter 18:16. The dark web worker bug itself was not too scary. In terms of attack skills, it only knew how to spit out a bunch of scorching venom to burn the enemy in front of it. It could also spit out flames. If it was a little disgusting, it could just eat a young spider to regain some vitality. What was really difficult to deal with was its characteristics. As long as one worker bug was killed, Bestalac would go crazy and enter a frenzied state. In the past, there was a powerful fire elemental lord who killed 5 of her children, worker bugs, without a care and was directly torn to pieces by the crazy Bestalac. Shaynox really wanted to remind Duque, but the second brother of Executus smiled lewdly and did not care at all. Boss even secretly shook his head at him and told him not to meddle. Although Shaynox also knew that there could be a world of difference in strength between demigods. For example, if he were to fight with the current master of the Land of Fire, Logger, he would definitely be killed. But this demigod hunter still felt a little uncertain. In the end, he still remained silent. It was true that he had defected to Duque. Since Duque did not mind showing off his strength, he was also willing to see how powerful his new master was. More than a dozen huge dark web worker bugs quickly rushed over. Behind them and at their feet, there were countless small spiders. The patter of footsteps and the sharp grinding of teeth made the Alliance powerhouses feel a little numb. Since Duque said that it was none of their business, no one thought of making a move. They just habitually raised the weapons in their hands. A new flame suddenly shone in the air, and everyone saw a strange scene. Time seemed to have sped up, and the fire clouds that seemed to be tumbling randomly in the air were gathering together in a strange trajectory. In less than 2 seconds, the smoke in the sky had turned into long spears of flames. Hissing sounds could be heard as the spears tore through the air. They pierced through the spiderwebs above their heads with unparalleled ferocity and fell to the ground. Chi! 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 The flame spears with a higher temperature easily pierced through the bodies of the dark web worker bugs. On the spot, more than a dozen worker bugs let out miserable cries and fell to the ground. Shaynox's face twitched. Even he did not dare to kill so many of the broodmother's children like this. This was simply courting death. Did his new master have absolute confidence in him? Or was he possessed? Sure enough, the broodmother's voice sounded like it came from the depths of hell, and the flames spewing out of its eye sockets were at least a meter high. Perhaps this was the death stare. Bestalac gnashed her teeth and roared, "Damn humans! Very well, you remind me of the Flame Lord who dared to kill my child. I will let you have a good taste of my anger." Her glowing and hot spider but suddenly became even bigger and hotter, like a rapidly inflating balloon that could burst at any moment. She pulled a thick strand of spider silk and quickly fell upside down. Anger had given her strength, but it had also robbed her of her rationality. Her eyes, which were filled with flames, did not even notice the subtle changes in the law of fire in the surrounding space. She would never see the teasing smile on Duque's face. Quickly landing on the ground, her 5-story-tall body emitted an ear-piercing tremor. She screamed and had just raised a pair of scythe-like front claws of the Grim Reaper, when Duque's attack arrived. As a piercing sword, Duque rarely used Song of Light and Shadow to slash. Even though the strength of the blade was worthy of being a divine artifact, Duque still did not want to waste it. This time, Duque used it to make a magical horizontal slash. In a 180-degree range, a golden line spread out and disappeared in a flash. As if there was a strange distortion in space, Bestalac was about to forcefully slash, but suddenly found that her body's center of gravity was off. As a 6-legged commander-tier monster in its own nest, it was impossible for her to lose her footing. The only explanation for her loss of center of gravity was that a golden line had appeared at the front of her 6 spider legs, the calf. In Shaynox's field of vision, the golden lines on these 6 legs were not broken. They were connected in a line. From the front of the broodmother's legs to the red towering boulders on the edge of the spider's nest. Only the top experts could see that when Dooku waved his sword just now, there was a golden ripple in the air. He broke through the turbid stench of the lair and swept through this not-too-small space. At first, the demigod fire demon hunter did not think it was possible. But he immediately saw that Bestelac's 6 long legs, which were almost as strong as his, were cut off in the middle by the golden line. Not only her legs, but there was also the sound of stones cracking. The golden lines on the stone wall behind the broodmother were all cut off. Because Xueqi swung his sword diagonally upward, the holy golden light caused the huge stones to immediately have a very smooth surface along the golden line, which was slightly inclined to the ground at an angle of 15 degrees. Several huge stones the size of hills were suddenly split in half and began to collapse diagonally under the effect of gravity. Everything around them seemed to be forced into a state of slow motion. Everyone could clearly see that the broodmother, who had lost her 6 legs, knelt forward along the slanted cut like a fanatic worshipping a supreme god. Bestelac's mouth was wide open. That should be an expression of horror, right? She screamed. No! Even at this moment, she still did not give up. In a situation where she lost control of her body, she still used her broken 6 legs to kick with all her might. Moreover, there seemed to be a blazing flame spurting out of her buttocks, temporarily using it as a flame propeller. Her whole body rushed towards Xueqi. At this moment, Xueqi's raised arms suddenly retracted. The golden arc of light slashed out again. Xueqi showed everyone what a melee mage was with his actions. This time, everyone saw it. In the blazing hot blood mist that filled the sky, including the little spiders that had not been crushed to death by the collapsed boulders, everyone saw. The pair of forearms that Beth-Till-Lac swung down suddenly rotated 360 degrees in a very strange posture, and then fell off from the joint position. The broken parts still carried a blazing aura like that of a flamethrower. Just like that, they spun in the air and flew to the back of her huge body. The flow of time seemed to have returned to normal. Only at this moment did the collapsed boulders ruthlessly fall down, and very coincidentally, right on top of the broodmother's big buttocks. No! No! Ah! The broodmother screamed wildly, and at the same time began her ultimate move, smoldering destruction. If she really blew up the fire elements that had accumulated in her abdomen, it would probably be a small-scale nuclear explosion. There might even be a small mushroom cloud or something. However, Xueqi stretched out his left hand, grasped the air, and like extinguishing a spark, the fire was extinguished. Chapter 1817. No! This is impossible. The broodmother had completely collapsed. Her sharp mouthparts began to dig at the soil because of her position, but her body, which had lost 6 legs and 2 forearms, was still twisting unyieldingly. Everyone's mouths were wide open. Especially the fire demons who had just surrendered. They seemed to have seen the most incredible thing in their lives. Xueqi's performance was over before it even started. Those who did not know what was going on would think that Xueqi was just showing off the power of his melee mage. Only those who truly understood how to control the elements would understand what a terrifying thing Xueqi had just done. He had extinguished all the fire elements that a demigod monster had condensed. That was a terrifying amount of energy that was enough to blast everything within a radius of hundreds of meters into ashes. Duke, who controls the amount of elemental control in the fire elemental realm, is just that amazing. With a fire control technique similar to Law, he killed one of the guardians of the land of fire, Bestelac the mother of spiders. Major Domo, she's yours. This is your reward for winning over all the fire demons to my side, Xueqi said calmly, and then left with the Alliance of Heroes. Major Domo was overjoyed on the spot. He had been working for Duke for many years. Although he had been forced to surrender in the beginning, after so many years, even if he was not outstanding, he still had hard work even if he did not make any contributions. This time, Duke had casually tossed him a commander-level demigod that had yet to perish. This was definitely a great gift from the heavens. All the existences in the land of fire were violent. They grew by constantly killing each other, absorbing each other's power, and finally achieving evolution again and again. Of course, over the past thousands of years, there had been many powerful fire elemental creatures who had challenged the Fire Demon King. When Ragnaros defeated the challengers again and again, this relatively stable power structure was formed. Now that Xueqi had appeared out of nowhere, there was a great chance that he could change all of this. Major Domo didn't care. He laughed as he pounced forward, his sharp claws piercing into the back of the broodmother's head. Beth-Till-Lac let out the most mournful scream since the start of the battle. She called for help from her descendants, but she didn't expect her most cherished descendants of the nightmare web spider to abandon her without any affection. As Majordomo's sharp claws continued to extract her life force and flame essence, the broodmother's struggles and screams finally weakened and disappeared. In contrast, Majordomo's aura was rising. No, it was skyrocketing. He laughed loudly and allowed the sharp black bone spikes to pierce through his body. In just a few breaths, he had turned into a huge porcupine. The thing in the shape of a black sea urchin was burning more and more vigorously in the fanatical worship of the fire demons. It was conceivable that before long, a new demigod would be born from the corpse of an old demigod. Sean Knox stroked his 4 bushy mustaches and covered his mouth in the end. He was afraid that his ambition and fanaticism would be sensed by Majordomo. If it could be said that his previous surrender was a choice made out of helplessness, now he saw a new hope, a new path. Yes. As long as he showed his loyalty to the new master, he would be rewarded. Sean Knox's only remaining eye was filled with fanatical flames. Just as Xueqi killed a low-level demigod in 3 moves, the second group of demigods was also advancing. Against the lava giant leader Leolise, who was wrapped in thick layers of rock as armor and moved very slowly, the Bear Brothers' fatal 18 slaps were quite effective. If a mortal attacked it, they would have to attack its left and right feet, making it step on the volcano that it had summoned. This would erase the armor on its body, causing it to dig its own grave. Since they were also demigods, they didn't have to worry so much. It was a perfect example of, don't be afraid, just be tough. 4 huge bear paws kept flying, looking like they were doing the Big Dipper fist. Anyway, when the 2 giant bear monsters attacked, the sound was earth-shattering. It would be even better if it was accompanied by the sound effects of, oh! As 2 demigods with magic and elemental support from the weave, their cooperation and attacks were even more violent. They smashed the obsidian armor on Leolise at a speed visible to the naked eye. Armor? Smashed them all. Obsidian monsters that wanted to provide armor for their boss? Smashed them to death all the same. The Bear Brothers ignored all attacks and fought head-on. What was even more amazing was that Xueqi's weave was too powerful. In the past, when Xueqi invaded other people's domains, he had to work hard to expand the weave to ensure the energy supply. But this time, after Xueqi obtained Logger's divinity, the Land of Fire was already half his home field. With Majordomo's help, he could set up elemental pipes here without any scruples. After absorbing the fire elemental energy into the weave, it would be converted into the energy needed by the demigods and directly supplied to them. The Bear Brothers under Xueqi were now in a state of complete adrenaline. They didn't even need a Vina to make a move, and victory was decided. 18 seconds into the battle, Lord Leolise fell to the ground. Under the lead of a few fire demons, the demigod team headed straight for the gate to Ragnarok's main hall. The one guarding the gate was naturally the gatekeeper, Belloc. Along the way, nothing happened. The problem was that the wolf god was up to something. As they walked, they saw a group of fire demons besieging a huge molten demon hound. Goldring extended his right front paw and pointed at the demon hound. Do you know? As long as it's a canine, it will worship me if I go up and roar. Goldring ran up and roared. Then, the demon hound ignored him. It was unknown whether the wolf god had lost his mind for too long, but he didn't know that the molten demon hound was a fire elemental creature and not a canine. William said coldly, "Let me tell you, I just have to go up and I can make him believe in me." William charged up and used Bloodlust, Dragon's Roar, Wrath, and Bloodlust. Both swords slashed wildly in a dazzling manner, and it ended in less than 3 seconds. Seeing that the molten demon hound had turned into a dead dog and was lying on the ground in front of William, Goldring was puzzled. What kind of religion is this? William sheathed his sword and said seriously, "Many years ago I heard my uncle Duke Marcus say something like this when he was drunk. His words left a deep impression on me. That is, when the sun rises in the east, only I am undefeatable. Scholarly and martial, the divine kitchen knife sect. He should be talking about us warriors." Goldring was dumbfounded. Chapter 18:18. Facing Goldring, William felt a natural sense of weakness and helplessness. Goldring was a demigod invited by the Dream Queen, Isera. Moreover, Goldring had a good nature. No matter what, he was one of them. The problem was that a man talking to a wolf about life, values, and whatnot was just nonsense. Due to the difference in their worldviews, William couldn't convince Goldring at all. He couldn't beat him with words, nor could he beat him in a fight. Even if he could beat him, he couldn't really do it. Left with no choice, William could only learn the tricks that Xueqi had taught him. He talked about ideals and you talked about life with him. He talked about life with you and you talked about girls with him. Since Goldring couldn't be chased away, and he still needed William's help, William might as well lead him in circles. They could talk about anything except the bullshit of acknowledging one's ancestors. William was forced into a corner. He couldn't accept giving up his father's name of Rin. It had nothing to do with benefits. It was purely an honor as a man and a warrior. Originally, he wasn't close to Xueqi, mainly because he was a straightforward and impatient person. He wasn't like Xueqi, who had so many tricks up his sleeves. Now, he had to learn from Xueqi to go around a wolf god. It was a little ironic. The gatekeeper, Belrock, wasn't hard to find. The land of fire that descended on the southern foothills of Mount Hyjal wasn't big, but it wasn't small either. The core area was only a few hundred square kilometers. The road to Ragnaros was easy to find. It was in the northern part of the Molten Wilderness, and they could get there after defeating Belrock. It was as if some mysterious restriction had been placed on Bestalac and Lord Leolis. Before the two leaders were defeated, the road to Ragnaros' Throne of Destiny was covered with magma from an erupting volcano. When the news of the two leaders being killed came through the magic transmission, a huge fire elemental creature with the appearance of a Doom Walker demon appeared in front of the group of demigods and William. The eyes of the tortoise god Tatora, the wolf god Goldring, Cenarius, Howl, and William lit up at the same time. They had a natural antagonism towards demons. Perhaps they each had their own thoughts, but they all had a natural hostility towards the devil. The devil in front of him had obviously mutated. It had a typical pair of demon wings and reverse-bent calves, but its exposed limbs had mottled lava marks on them. His 7-story tall body was as red as a burning iron. The strange light and heat made mortals subconsciously want to stay away from him. This team didn't have Xueqi's ice shield to isolate the air. However, William and the other two were wearing the magical gemstones that Xueqi had given them. These crystals contained a high concentration of mana and were connected to the magic net. It could be said that Xueqi was taking care of them remotely. William pointed at the gatekeeper standing behind the 4 fire elemental giants. Goldrin, why don't we make a small bet first? The wolf deity perked up. How is it? What are we betting on? If I win, you'll call me daddy? William snorted coldly. Let's bet on whose damage is higher in this battle. Me or you. If I win, don't bother me until we finish fighting in the land of fire. The white-furred wolf deity squinted his wolf eyes. What if I win? I'll call you whatever you want for the time being. William was rather stubborn. The wolf deity immediately felt that there was hope. If he could call him daddy once, wouldn't there be a second and third time in the future? This was a good deal. All right. The wolf deity took the bait. On the other side, Brawl and Valilla grabbed onto William. Hey, William, are you confident? That's the wolf deity with high attack power. William would never hide anything from his old partners. Under normal circumstances, I'd definitely lose, but this time, I have Xueqi's help. When William mentioned Xueqi, the two friends stopped talking. Xueqi might be funny and unreliable, but when it came to big things, no one was more reliable than Xueqi. Valilla was more attentive and noticed William's strange behavior. What's wrong? Did Xueqi set some harsh conditions? William looked constipated. If we succeed this time, I'll have to respectfully call Xueqi uncle every time I see him. Pfft. The two friends burst out laughing. This could be considered a secret of Stormwind. Actually, in terms of age, Xueqi was not much older than William. He was only 7 or 8 years older. Strictly speaking, Xueqi and William were of the same generation. The bad thing was that Xueqi had started his career too early, and he was brothers with William's father and Anduin Lothar. He should have called him brother, but he had to call him uncle. As a straightforward boy, William could not accept it. For so many years, William would call Xueqi Duke or Commander-in-Chief in formal situations. In private, he would only call Xueqi Xueqi, and he would not call Xueqi uncle unless he had no other choice. He did not expect Xueqi to take advantage of William at such a time. Just thinking about it made him speechless. Valilla and Brawl were too embarrassed to attack William anymore. Of course, they understood that it was better for William to call a human, who was technically his elder, an uncle than a wolf a father. The former was still reasonable, but the latter would ruin their worldview. This was simply picking the demon that was more pleasing to the eye, and then jumping into the pit. This battle. I'll take the lead with Tortola. William volunteered, which made the other demigods look at him with surprise. Berserkers were definitely more than enough to attract the enemy's attention, but they were too fragile. How could they compare to Tortola, who carried a tortoise shell all over the streets? I think that guy's flaming blade has a special effect that weakens physical defense. It's too much of a loss to let Tortola take the lead from the start, William said. Glorious flames. Belrock's attack will awaken a burning spark in the body of his main target. The physical damage received by the target will be increased by 20%, and the target's maximum HP will be increased by 20%. Every time Belrock triggered the glorious flames, he would receive a layer of the Soul of Fire effect. Every time Belrock triggered the glorious flames, he would receive a layer of the Soul of Fire effect, which would increase the fire damage dealt by 20%. This was Belrock's skill in history. Now that there was a traitor like Majordomo Executus, there was room to hide the source of the skill. After everyone agreed, William was the first to charge forward. Unsurprisingly, Belrock directly smashed the first few glorious flames into William's body. No one expected that the flames that were supposed to increase HP would have such a magnificent change. Chapter 18-19. Right now, a bunch of big shots in the Alliance had divine weapons in their hands. This was an era of heroes. This was a blessing, but it also troubled bards. It was easy to focus on one thing and lose sight of another, overlooking some powerful divine weapons. The two underrated divine swords, Sharatol, Shadow Ripper, and Aramine, Shadow Plunderer, were the victims of propaganda. To be fair, the power and special effects of these two divine weapons were definitely not weak. It was a pity that because of Duque, William, who was once the third most powerful person in the Alliance, seemed to be a little weak. Regardless of whether it was in the original history or in this life, William was not weak at all. He inherited the soul fragment of the wolf god Goldring, in addition to the body that was tempered by the cruel battles of the slave gladiators, the two divine weapon longswords, and the experience he gained from fighting against the semi-god rankers under Duke's leadership. It was no exaggeration to say that William in this life was stronger than he was in history. Because of Belrock's huge body, he naturally had the problem of moving too much in the eyes of mortals. William was known as a writing maniac, and his agility was also very high. The flaming demon's huge swords couldn't hit William at all. Instead, William seized the opportunity to use a knockoff, Meteor Blast Chop, and ruthlessly slashed the great demon 18 times. What was more impressive was that William's swords were rare dual attribute divine weapons. Frowny Face Shadow Ripper had a significant increase in attack power for creatures with shadow energy in their bodies. It could also absorb flames and holy energy in the surroundings. William's HP should have increased by 20%, but it was all increased on his weapons. Shadow Plunderer could absorb the shadow energy in the enemy's body and slowly convert it into the light attribute. The gorgeous sword light was continuous, and each strike was fiercer and fiercer than the one before. It was as if William could kill this demigod demon single-handedly. If it wasn't for Tortola's transformation into a certain dragon tortoise and the hilarious but realistic windmill roll, where the tortoise's head smacked Belrock's buttocks hard, giving the archdemon a "your ass is broken, the floor is full of wounds, and your smile has turned yellow," Belrock might really have chased after Varian relentlessly. As a main MT, Tortola's taunt skills were impressive. Without seeing him do anything, he stretched his neck and aimed the tortoise's head at the great demon, giving him a sweet smile. A taunt skill that mortals couldn't even imagine took effect. No one knew whether Tortola, in Belrock's vision, was repeatedly ravaging him with his retractable head or something else. Anyway, Belrock waved his swords in exasperation and chased after Tortola's tortoise shell. Clang! Dang! Clang! Every single sword strike was deflected away, but the great demon Xueqi continued slashing down. At this time, the rest of the fighters had also entered the arena. Goldring was a little nervous when he saw William slashing so happily. With a howl, it pounced from behind and attacked Belrock's back frantically, tearing with its claws and biting with its teeth. Demigods all had a scale in their hearts. Even without any statistics, they could tell whose damage was higher just by looking at the wound. Goldring said proudly, "Son, did you see that? This is the power of your father's attack. Battle depended on momentum. Imposing manner. Understand?" At first, William wanted to go all out, but he suddenly heard Duque's voice. "The aggro is about to shift. Just in time, let him attack. On the other side, the wolf god, who didn't know that he had gone too far, was acting recklessly. Who knew that the huge Belrock would suddenly turn his head and stare fiercely at him? Not good. Danger. But Goldring was still stubborn. It's okay. Look at my gorgeous agility and dodging abilities. At this moment, Goldring didn't notice that Belrock's originally dazzling swords had changed color. It was the color of a shadow as dark as ink. Blade of Destruction. Belrock spat out the name of this move. It was almost a convention that the Burning Legion's abyssals had the word destruction in their hands, and it was usually not bad. In fact, the wolf god had already made a magnificent leap backward, jumping a full 10 meters away. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough. The blade that was already 5 meters long suddenly extended like a tongue of flame. The long dark light slashed down, fiercely striking Goldring's waist that was almost bent backwards in midair. For a second, the bystanders thought that the great wolf god was going to be cut in half and die before he could even get started. Surprisingly, there were no external injuries. But at this moment, Goldring would rather have suffered external injuries. That was because the violent shadow energy had already penetrated his thick and beautiful white fur and directly entered his body, messing up his muscles and organs. A woo! This was a downright sorrowful cry. It was also a classic example of extreme joy turning to sorrow. If it were a mortal, they would definitely kneel down after being slashed by this sword. Fortunately, he was Goldring, a powerful demigod with a demigod body. His body was not purely made of flesh and blood. A more important part of his body was his spiritual energy body. Even so, close to 90% of his life force had been destroyed by the sword just now. Cenarius, who was holding the line, was so scared that he almost peed his pants. They hadn't even seen Ragnaros yet. If they lost a main demigod, this battle would not be easy to fight. He didn't care about holding back. He immediately used Rejuvenation and Heal, followed by Tranquility, which was an ultimate skill that could heal the entire battlefield. Regardless of the fact that the power of the skill would be halved in the Land of Fire, he had to save the wolf god first. If this was in the game, the wolf god would be in a miserable state, and his HP would increase by a huge amount. The wolf god, who thought that he was awesome but almost became a fool, subconsciously jumped a few steps towards Cenarius with his tail between his legs. At this time, it was still better to stay close to the healer. William was inexplicably shocked at first. Then, he heard Duque's shameless laughter. Don't worry. Belrock is only scary with this move. He can't make any other attacks in the shadow state. As long as you don't get hit consecutively, you won't die. William almost couldn't help but laugh. Uncle. Duque, you're too bad. How am I bad? You were the one who asked for my help. You should be the one who's bad, right? Duque's words made sense. After all, it was William who asked Duque for help. As a gatekeeper, Belrock's specialty was that he could fight and carry. However, he lacked the means to recover, so he could only rely on tricks like Ordeal Crystal to put his enemies in danger. If they really fought, it wouldn't be a big deal. 3 demigods, in addition to William and Lord Howl, who were powerful enough to kill gods. Belrock didn't last long before he collapsed. Chapter 1820. With the collapse of Belrock's huge body, almost all beings in the Land of Fire noticed the changes in the Land of Fire. In the unstable space of the Land of Fire, in the misty northern sky, a gigantic palace that reached the clouds appeared on the other side of the seemingly endless sea of lava. It was so majestic and tall that it could support both heaven and earth. It had a grayish-black background, some bright red patterns, and some golden runes. This was obviously not the work of nature. This was the palace where the Fire Demon King, Ragnaros, resided, the Saffron Palace. After defeating Lord Laeris, Avina was the first to rush back to see if she needed help. Who knew that she would see Belrock fall as soon as she came back? As the demigod with the strongest eyesight, she keenly noticed another change in the Land of Fire. Look! Avina spread her wings and pointed to a hillside that looked like a stairway to heaven, rising higher and higher. At the top of the hillside, there was a huge circular portal. A moment ago, it was just an empty ring, and within the ring, one could see the sea of lava behind it. If anyone were to pass through the ring so foolishly, they would probably fall directly into the magma and be burnt to a crisp without leaving any bones behind. As Belrock fell, the runes on the ring, which were originally like chicken intestines, suddenly shone with a golden light. Under the illumination of the golden light, a portal with a mysterious and evil aura opened. In the center of the portal, in the chaotic and mysterious aura, there was a ferocious skull that kept flashing. No matter who looked at it, they felt that the skull was opening its mouth at them, as if it wanted to swallow them. This is... Everyone was a little uncertain. At this moment, Xueqi came over, surrounded by hundreds of fire demons. One of the former guardians of the land of fire, the demigod hunter Xueqi, humbly bowed to the other demigods and then spoke. That is, flame breach. It can lead to Ragnaros's palace. In fact, although the land of fire was indeed the core area of the fire elemental plane, it was actually a cage where the titans of the pantheon had imprisoned Ragnaros and some overly ferocious fire elementals that couldn't be completely destroyed in a short period of time. Only through this portal can we reach the core region of the land of fire. Major Domo pondered for a moment and added, Ragnaros has been severely injured twice so far, and his soul has become loose. The first time was 25,000 years ago, when the Titans conquered Azeroth. The second time was when you destroyed his doppelganger in the molten core. If Master kills Ragnaros in the Saffron Palace, he will be erased from this world forever. A person who betrayed his master for glory was never likable. Most demigods did not like Major Domo, but few knew that he had been forced to surrender by Xueqi. He didn't care anymore. Anyway, he could only follow Xueqi all the way to the dark. When Xueqi became rich, he naturally followed suit. If Xueqi knelt, he could only follow suit. Therefore, completely ignoring the gazes of other existences, Major Domo revealed this big news that was definitely good for the Alliance army. Xueqi felt a little good. Duke had had enough of enemies that couldn't be killed no matter what. They would often come back to life and resurrect. He didn't want all his enemies to enter the eternal war list. Wouldn't it be annoying to have them cause trouble again after 30 or 50 years? Since there was a chance this time, he had to make Ragnaros kneel and sing Bleak. Let's go. The ferocious skull on top of the fire crevice kept opening and closing as if it was trying to scare the intruder or swallow the intruder in one bite. Xueqi was not interested in this boring trick of pretending to be scary. To be safe, he, who was best at spatial magic among demigods, naturally reached out a tish and inserted it into the portal. As soon as he touched it, Xueqi almost laughed out loud. He didn't know if the fire elemental fellows were careless in the first place, or if they were born with low vigilance. They felt that if there really was an enemy, they could easily get rid of the enemy with their strength. Without a butler in such a huge land of fire, it felt like Lager was deaf and blind. Xueqi could clearly sense that Ragnaros didn't even put any of his divine thoughts on the land of fire. He didn't even have the thought of being vigilant, let alone being on guard. Lager was trying hard to communicate with the fire elemental elements in the whole of Azeroth, attempting to tame all the fire elemental elements in the world and turn them into his subordinates. No wonder this guy has a total of 2 managers. Xueqi muttered. Beside him, Major Domo, who had just eaten the ghost web spider queen and had a chance to become a demigod, had been paying attention to his master's words. He was completely baffled by what he heard. He couldn't possibly understand. Xueqi was talking about him and Fandral Staghelm, who was supposed to be the next manager. Lager was like an illiterate lord. Because he was too uncultured and only knew how to act rashly, all management matters could only be handed over to the managers. Now that history had changed, Fandral Staghelm didn't defect to the enemy, so naturally, there was no more managers. There was also the rather troublesome flame-druid combination in history. One demigod after another passed through the fiery rift. They arrived in front of a huge palace with its doors wide open. Who are you? This isn't a place mortals are allowed to come. At least a few fire elemental creatures appeared. 2 fat fire elemental flame archons, and 2 lava giants with magma flowing all over their bodies, molten flame fathers, were all the soldiers guarding the gate. They were all high attack, high HP, and hard to deal with lava sputtering. If they were just mortal powerhouses, it might be a little difficult. But Xueqi had more than half a dozen demigods on his side. The bear brothers howled and pounced together. There were other wolves faster than them. The wolf god had just lost and was depressed. Because Belloc had taken out 90% of his HP, Goldring was restrained in the latter half of the previous battle, so he naturally couldn't beat Varian. The wolf god was rather unreliable when it came to recognizing other races as his sons, but he was still very principled. He said he wouldn't call him Sun Smash. So he wouldn't. He vented all his anger on the little monsters. Other beings might be afraid of the lava damage from these elite monsters, but Goldring's defense and vitality weren't considered strong among demigods. But before he became the god of the wilderness, he was born as a winter wolf. He walked in the polar regions and was born with frost elements. The surface of his body was surrounded by a freezing aura that was far stronger than the ice barrier of a Breaking Dawn mage, and it was very effective against fire elemental monsters. Chapter 1821. As the saying went, a cat's hands were cheap, while a dog's mouth was cheap. Duke couldn't figure out whether Goldring belonged to the Meow Star family or the Wong Star family. The wolf god was very fast. Mortals could at most attack the father of molten flames with the speed of a tortoise robbing a snail, but Goldring was robbing a snail-level lava giant at the speed of a cheetah. With a single leap, he flew up 5 stories high. His 4 claws and mouth attacked at the same time, and with lightning speed, he plucked off the lava armor on the giant's arm almost instantly. He had broken through 5 layers of armor as soon as he entered the battlefield. Goldring's white shadow flashed left and right a few times, and the rock giant turned into an ordinary giant with bright lava flowing all over it. Cenarius, who had been depressed by Xueqi for a long time and had been a babysitter for a long time, had never beaten anyone up before. It was rare for him to show off. He posed in a Vsop centaur pose, raised his front hooves high in the air, and a javelin made of vines automatically formed in his right hand. Cenarius exhaled and shouted, "Ha!" With a loud shout, a green vine spear cut through the scorching sky, like a man taking a piss. It split in half in the air and shot directly into the chests of 2 fathers of molten flames who had stripped off their outer layer of rock. A touch of green rose from the foreheads of the 2 high-level lava giants. It was as if they saw something they had never seen before in their lives, a vast grassland overflowing with green. 4 high-level elites lay dead just like that, leaving only lava residue on the ground. Demigods wouldn't be interested in the corpses of this level of trash. But Shanox's 2 molten hounds were different. They rushed forward eagerly and tasted the delicious flame essence left behind after the death of their compatriots. Without needing Xueqi to do anything, the group continued to advance deeper into the Saffron Fortress. As a player in his previous life, when Xueqi entered the fortress, he would complain about who had built such a gorgeous palace for Lager. Later, he found out that it was actually in the style of the Titans. The servants of the Titans were built according to the standards of a prison. This fortress was a prison. But even if it was made into a prison, it was still too beautiful. Most of the doors here were standard circular, and the flame characters on the circular borders gave off a smooth feeling of Latin. The brownish-black floor, paired with a large red round ball, highlighted the identity of the prisoners in this prison. Golden hemispherical braziers could be seen from time to time, with a golden band around them. They looked like a combination of Saturn and its rings. It was quite sci-fi. A fire elemental that looked as strong as Baron Geddon of the Molten Core blocked the only path. If it were 10 years ago, Xueqi and his hero alliance would have a headache encountering this fellow. At the very least, he wouldn't be able to escape after 20 minutes of intense fighting. However, times were changing. After experiencing many battles, the heroes were also growing rapidly. Especially when the will of planet Azeroth was slowly unlocking the limits of what mortals could achieve, the Lava Dominator, which was equivalent to a boss monster in the Dark Portal for 15 years, was nothing more than an appetizer. Without the demigod taking action, the Alliance heroes would beat it to death. Entering a huge hall, there was only a narrow path leading to the platform in the center of the lava lake. As the Alliance army approached, 2 dark green bugs, Molten Burner and Molten Spitter, suddenly emerged from the lava on both sides of the path. As soon as they came out, they spat directly in the faces of the Alliance warriors. Unfortunately, their attacks couldn't even break through Xueqi's ice shield. The raven goddess Avienna flapped her wings and casually shot them with a few lightning arrows. Ragnaro's mountain-like figure entered the vision of every powerhouse in the coalition army. He was too huge, so huge that it was impossible to ignore. His lower body was immersed in the lava, and every inch of his skin and limbs exposed to the air was made of golden flames. The metal gauntlets, pauldrons, and breastplates that seemed to be made of black iron were full of earthworm-shaped runes similar to the decorations on the gates of the Saffron Fortress. If his calculations weren't wrong, these should be the shackles that the Titans had left him back then. The aura of a demigod was extremely powerful, not to mention a bunch of demigods. Among the many powerful auras, There were a few that were strong enough to wake Ragnaros up. What? Mortals dare to step into my territory? Ragnaros shuddered. His relatively slow reaction finally caught the soul waves that made him extremely disgusted and angry. Major Domo? Duke Marcus? And Shaynux? You traitors. Ragnaros was so angry that even though his words were a bit messed up, his anger directly ignited the intense reaction of every drop of lava and every bit of fire element in the fortress. With his earth-shattering roar, the entire fortress, and even the entire fiery land, could clearly feel the tremors. It was as if a huge ancient volcano was about to erupt in the next second, spewing out terrifying lava that could cover 3,000 kilometers. The two fire demon leaders were shocked. They had an almost natural fear of their former master. It was the painful memory of being brutally abused countless years ago, and it was also the accumulated power that couldn't be erased after thousands of years. They were a little scared on the spot. How could Duque give in to them? If they gave in, wouldn't it be a slap in the face to their new master, Duque? Duque smiled. His voice spread out with divine power and instantly spread across the battlefield. Snap! Duque snapped his fingers crisply. The sound wasn't loud, but it was as if the most mysterious switch had been pressed. All of a sudden, the fire elements and surging lava in the entire Saffron Fortress all calmed down. Ragnaros immediately realized that it was Duque who defeated his clone and robbed him of his divinity and control of the elements in the fiery land. Then, he used that control to control the situation. Ragnaros cursed, "You despicable thief!" Amused, Duque tilted his head and laughed. Thief? Why do I clearly remember that I killed my way into your clone's lair, the molten core, and killed your clone before openly snatching the power that originally belonged to you. As for you insulting me as a thief, I would like to express my deepest protest. If possible, please call me a thief with divinity. He was just robbing a thief, yet he sounded so righteous and dignified. Several of Duque's women laughed on the spot. Tyrant even smiled brightly, without a trace of the dignified high priestess. While Duque's women were amused, Ragnaros was naturally even angrier. Robber! Traitor! Destroy all of you! I will watch you burn. Fire will purify everything. Chapter 1822. Accompanied by Logger's distinctive slogan, he raised the giant hammer in his hand high. The hammerhead alone looked as huge as a heavy tank. It was covered in spikes and surrounded by a temperature of over 10,000 degrees. It was very powerful. Duke knew that this was no longer the hand of Ragnaros the Balrog that Logger liked to use the most. Instead, it was a lower-level hand of scorching destruction. This two-handed hammer was equally powerful, but in theory, it definitely didn't have the terrifying power to kill someone instantly. In fact, it couldn't be calculated that way. The divine artifact, the Balrog hammer, was held in the hands of Logger's clone, so its power was extremely limited. The hand of flaming destruction was an epic weapon, but it was used in the hands of Logger, who was blessed by the fire elements of most of the Land of Fire. In the end, it was hard to say which weapon was more powerful. Of course, there was another saying. The Balrog hammer was the Balrog hammer precisely because it was held in the hands of a Balrog. Only in Ragnaros's hands would this hammer be the genuine Savra's. Suddenly, he felt a little lucky that because Magni Bronzebeard had turned into a diamond, the divine artifact, the Balrog hammer, was temporarily passed on to his younger brother, Muradin, and was not present today. If the original Balrog hand had appeared, it was really hard to predict what would have happened. Even Duque didn't dare to take Ragnaros's angry blow head-on. It couldn't be helped. Not every demigod had strong vitality and defense. For example, Medivh did have strong magic power and magic attack power, but when he didn't use a magic shield, he was not much stronger than an ordinary human man. Duque had used 3 elements to completely strengthen his body, but he was a human. No matter how much he strengthened himself, he wouldn't be more durable than a dragon with half his body. When Ragnaros began to spread his fire domain and the other elements couldn't operate well, Duque didn't want to casually break through space and use flash when facing Logger's hammer. A true top expert who had stepped into the divine realm was extremely difficult to fool. Duque couldn't guarantee that his teleportation would be seen through. Therefore, Duque decided to call for help. He circulated his chi in his dantian and shouted, "Big bear!" In the next moment, a giant bear that was walking on its hind legs swayed its big bear butt and used charge to knock away Ragnaros, Savra's, right before it was about to slam down on it. As he worked, The demigod did not forget to mock Xueqi fiercely. "How many times have I told you? My name is Xueqi." Xueqi didn't care and shouted again, "Bear too. F***ck. My name is Yuza." Although he was cursing, Urso, who had mastered elemental power, pounced on Lager. He pulled out a dazzling purple lightning spear from between his gigantic bare paws and threw it at Lager's lava body. Bzzzt bzzzt bzzzt. The destructive power of the wind element produced by the intense lightning clashed with the fire element on Lager's body. It could be clearly seen that the fire elements on Lager's body flinched and retreated. However, with the support of the fire element that was drawn from his lower body, the fire element immediately gained the upper hand. There were many who knew what was good for them. Cenarius immediately shouted, "We have to separate Lager from the land of fire. Otherwise, we will be fighting against the entire plane with our limited power." No matter how strong a demigod was, compared to the vast world, he was just a tiny speck of light. "What do we do?" Tyrant hurriedly asked in Xueqi's ear. Xueqi used the system to scan the surrounding environment. He narrowed his eyes and said quickly, "Attack with full force. There is a limit to how fast Ragnaros can replenish fire element from the land of fire. As long as our destructive power is faster than his replenishment speed, we can create an opportunity to separate him from the plane." In terms of pure speed, Iwina was the fastest. However, Iwina's strength was in her detection and perception. The one who could truly attack quickly was the wolf god. Goldring ran quickly on all fours. He sprinted close to the ground, looking like he was flying. He was so fast that the lava trap that Ragnaros had set up was indeed triggered by Goldring's claws. However, the wolf god was too fast. The surging lava spewed 3 stories into the sky. The exploding lava could only cover the afterimage of the wolf god as he moved quickly. Closing in on Lager, who only had half of his body exposed, Goldring was not greedy. With his agile body, he approached the Fire Demon King and quickly waved his limbs. His large white claws scratched the air dozens of times. It looked like he was scratching the air, but in reality, his claws had already released a continuous stream of wind blades containing the power of ice towards Lager. Roar! Suddenly suffering from the extremely destructive elemental attacks, even the thick-skinned Lager could not help but roar in pain. Lager raised the Balrog's hammer high again, but he was hit in the right arm by a huge tortoise shell flying at him. He almost lost his grip on Savras and dropped his hammer. After Duke cast an ice shield on him, the tortoise god let out a fart. It was not smelly, but it was especially loud. Poof! The hill-like turtle god flew into the air and smashed towards Lager. The extremely hard turtle shell carried Xueqi's powerful frost aura, and Lager grimaced from the impact. In his rage, Lager did not care whether Totora did it on purpose or not. He raised his hammer and smashed it at Totora. The tortoise deity retracted his head into the tortoise shell at a speed that seemed slow but was actually very fast. Yes, he relied on his turtle shell to make a living. You can smash it all you want, but if you really break it, it's my loss. After smashing 6 or 7 times in a row, Lager finally came to his senses amidst the pain of being beaten by the other powerhouses. Am I stupid? Why am I hitting a turtle? When the Fire Demon King was about to change targets, the 2 bear monsters raised Totora's turtle shell and threw it at him. Smack! Lager, whose lower body was hidden in the lava, was tragically hit in the face. Lava flowed out of his large nostrils. Could this be the legendary fire element version of Nosebleed? However, this time, Lager was not fooled. Come out, my children. Protect your king. Countless small inverted triangular fire elementals emerged from the edge of the platform where the Fire Demon King was. They rushed out of the pillars of fire and rushed towards the huge hammer Savras that Lager was hammering on the floor. Don't let them touch the hammer, Xueqi shouted. Ashbringer's bright golden holy light was the first to be unleashed. In less than half a second, all the children of fire on the right side of the platform were wiped out. Imriel stuck out her buttocks as she swung the divine artifact great axe in her hand, which did not fit her size, in a 720-degree arc. Happy flames swept across the area, destroying the Son of Fire and successfully absorbing all the fire elemental energy that was escaping from it. Chapter 1823. While the mortal heroes were busy dealing with the Son of Fire, Ragnaros hid. He completely hid his huge body in the lava lake in the middle of the platform. Not only that, but every 4 seconds, a dozen scorching lava arrows would shoot out from the boiling lava lake. Lager, who seemed to be a product of surging lava, actually had a different kind of scheme. He aimed every lava arrow at the heroes and demigods on the platform. Kalia could not dodge in time, and a lava arrow blasted into her body. If she had not swung the Veronel Ancient King's hammer in her hand at the last moment, and the head of the hammer floating above the handle suddenly bloomed with a soft golden light, blocking the blow with a huge shield, Kalia might have been disfigured. This was only a theoretical possibility. Kalia tilted her head and saw that Xueqi was looking at her. Xueqi was probably testing her skills and reaction speed. Kalia smiled sweetly at Xueqi. This was a response to his concern. After so many battles, the clumsy princess was now the main priest of the Alliance's hero group. Unless the enemy was too far apart, normal attacks really couldn't threaten her. No one thought that this scene would be seen by Lager, who was hiding under the lava. The eyes of fire elemental creatures were always just decorations. They didn't really have eyes. What they used to see, the world was actually sensing the elements of the world around them. In their perception, the world was roughly and simply divided into 4 elements: earth, water, fire, and wind. The surrounding fire elementals could see the situation, which meant that Lager himself had seen it. Seeing that his plan to summon the Son of Fire into Savras had been ruined, Lager stopped hiding and poked his upper body out of the lava lake. Watch out! The lava lake that the Fire Demon King is hiding in is another space. Xueqi finally realized. He didn't expect the seemingly reckless and irascible Lager to have such a cunning side. The Saffron Fortress was originally an independent space within the independent space of the Land of Fire. Who knew that there was another freaking space in the space? This kind of overlapping relationship really made one's scalp go numb. So what if I know? In the Land of Fire, I'm absolutely invincible, Lager roared proudly. All of a sudden, the Fire Demon King did something that surprised Xueqi. This move definitely did not exist in Xueqi's memories. Unlike in the original history, Ragnaros's momentum at the moment was that he wanted to kill all the invaders. First he gave it a big slap. His left hand suddenly swept from left to right. Not only did his golden left palm emit a high temperature, but it also sent Urso flying more than 10 meters away. At the same time, it also created a lava wave that was at least 10 meters tall and 20 meters wide. No matter how well equipped they were and how many fire resistance potions they had prepared beforehand, no mortal hero would be willing to bathe in the suffocating, invisible lava. That kind of deadly heat in the darkness would cause nightmares after just one. The veteran team members who had experienced the Battle of the Molten Core all retreated in a hurry, just like William. He had already rushed to the side of the lava lake and used the holy sword wind created by the dual sword artifact to slash at Lager's waist. Lager swung it horizontally, and he had no choice but to jump out of the attack range of the lava wave. Unexpectedly, this was a feint. Lager didn't intend to use this move to hurt anyone. All the previous actions were just a cover for the fire demon hammer that he had pulled behind him and raised high. Cenarius, who was at the outermost part of the platform, saw everything clearly. He immediately exclaimed, "Be careful." It wasn't that they didn't want to be careful. A fire giant whose upper body was 10 stories tall was extremely fast and terrifying. Anyone who had faced it before would know how terrifying it was. If it was just a simple physical attack, it would be terrifying enough. Not to mention, before this attack, Ragnaros had forcefully used his greater control of the elements to push away all the other elements on the platform. When the fire element was more than 99% dominant in a certain space, using other elemental magic would become a joke. If one wasn't a demigod, they probably wouldn't even be able to activate a life-saving skill like Ice Barrier. When Lager did this, Xueqi already felt that something was wrong. He also had a share of control in the fire elemental realm. Unfortunately, after the Land of Fire was connected to Azeroth and was replenished with new fire elements, his share was indirectly diluted. Even if he killed a few leaders and secretly snatched the elements in the Land of Fire, Xueqi's control of the fire elements in Lager's lair would not exceed 20%. Xueqi didn't know who Lager was going to attack. As a demigod of the magic net who made a living by controlling elements, Xueqi's first priority was to seize control of the elements nearby. He regained control in half a breath, and it even reached about 40%. However, Lager's all-out attack had already arrived. At this moment, Xueqi finally realized that Lager's target was Kalia. In a team battle, get rid of the opponent's healer first. This was common sense, and there was nothing wrong with it. Xueqi also knew that if he were in Lager's shoes, he would do the same. However, when Lager's Savra's Balrog smashed towards Kalia, Duque was still furious. Lager. F***CKU. Time seemed to have stopped. At this moment, there were actually many people who ran over to save the situation. Ushik sprinted over, his bear-like body already flying into the air with his limbs off the ground. On the other side, William brazenly activated the warrior profession skill, Assist. His body turned into a stream of light and rushed towards Kalia. As long as he could catch up, he would block this attack for Kalia even if he had to cross his swords to block it. However, everyone knew that both of them were half a beat too slow. Based on the attack speed and trajectory, the Balrog hammer would hit Kalia before they could. How was a human priest going to block this huge hammer that weighed more than 100 tons and contained a huge amount of fire elements? The answer was definitely that she couldn't. Just when everyone thought that Kalia's body would explode and she would die from this blow, Duque made his move. Pharaoh was never known for his defense. Even though Duque was a demigod, he didn't have the body to block Lager's full-powered physical attack. Duque had his own way of dealing with Duque. Unknowingly, his divine artifact sword had merged with his staff once again. A strange divine artifact spear turned into a gorgeous arc of light and pierced the bottom of Lager's Balrog hammer. Chapter 1824. The momentum of Ragnaros's hammer was absolutely astonishing. However, when a landslide would not affect anyone, no matter how powerful it was no different from fireworks. All that was left was a spectacular sight. Oh, and a bang! Duque had never thought of facing an enemy like Lager, who was both an elemental and a strength type. His spear strike was similar to Tai Chi, which was able to move 1,000 kilograms with little effort. He did not deliberately block it. Instead, he used the simple principle of leverage to cause Lager's hammer to miss. When the spear struck, the end of the hammer's handle rose slightly, and the huge hammerhead fell down in advance. In order to prevent the allied forces from protecting Kalia, Lager did not hold back in this hammer strike. This also meant that he had lost all room for adjustment. The hammerhead that was as big as a house came crashing down. Just the hard quadrangular protrusions on the hammerhead brushed past the outside of Kalia's body, and the protection blessing that Lager had thrown at Kalia shattered. In the face of a higher level of absolute destructive power, the so-called protection blessing, that could protect teammates from physical damage for a certain period of time was nothing more than a joke. When Kalia hurriedly retreated, a strand of blonde hair that had been hanging in front of her left chest rose as she leaned back. Because it was out of the protection range of Holy Word, Shield, it only brushed past and was instantly turned to ashes by the flames of Savras. After narrowly escaping death, all that was left was fear. Lager roared angrily and unwillingly raised 3 fingers on his left hand. Dozens of sparks of various sizes suddenly lit up on the ground around Kalia. This was a battle in a world of flames. Flying sparks and splashing lava droplets were nothing out of the ordinary. Existences with weaker elemental sensing would be hit by it in minutes. This wasn't some Mars. It was a highly variable, molten core. If left alone, it would absorb the fire elements in the surroundings within 1 to 2 seconds and turn into molten hellfire, turning the surroundings into a purgatory. Unfortunately, Lager was facing Duque, who had the strongest elemental sensing in the world. After dodging Lager's counterattack, Duque waved his hand, and the sparks that had just begun to light up disappeared without a trace like chalk being erased from a blackboard. Humph! Lager snorted coldly. Only now did Kalia truly feel a lingering fear. Her pure and pretty face instantly turned deathly pale. It seemed like Lager's attack had come to an end, but who would have thought that a scream would come from mid-air? Ah! No one noticed it until a scream rang out. Everyone looked over and saw that the Raven Goddess was bathed in flames and had fallen head first. From the looks of it, he didn't fall onto the platform, but into the lava lake in the distance. No one knew what had happened. Only Duque, through the records of the system elf, could see from the quick replay that Lager had used the moment he missed Kalia's attack to smash his hammer into the lava lake, creating a huge wave of lava that was tens of meters high. His ferocious attack had paralyzed Divina, making her think that it was just the aftermath of his attack. Who knew that his left hook would suddenly appear in the middle of the huge wave? Without any buffer, Avienna, who was in mid-air, took Lager's punch. I'll go save her. The agile wolf god flew away and left the battlefield. With the momentum of his wave-like subtle steps, his claws barely touched the surface of the lava lake outside the platform as he sprinted across the lake. With a gorgeous pounce, He managed to catch Avienna before she fell into the lava. For a second, Xueqi almost wanted to warn Avienna. Grow wretchedly and don't be reckless. No matter what, this was the first demigod that Lager had crippled. Soon, the second demigod that had retreated was born. No one had expected it to be Tortola. The turtle god also had his limitations. He was very strong in pure defense. What everyone had to consider was that his original body was a turtle. After leaving the familiar ocean and coming to land, his strength was slightly discounted. When he reached the land of fire, he had to give another 50% discount. His defense against physical attacks was indeed impressive, but Savra's main attack method was the fire element. Xueqi had already been continuously injecting frost elements into Tortola's body to offset the power of the fire element, but he had received too much fire element. When he couldn't expel it from his body, Tortola's demigod body was directly affected. His tortoise skin was drying and cracking, and his limbs were becoming sluggish. In the end, he couldn't even stand. Like a billiard ball, Lager hit his turtle shell horizontally and sent Tortola flying near the fortress gate. Shocking! Lager had seen through Tortola's weakness, slow movement. The turtle god's movements were slow due to a lack of water. Who knew how long it would take for him to crawl back to the center of the battlefield? That guy's turtle shell was measured in tons. Apart from him, who could carry such a large turtle shell back? Perhaps the Bear Brothers could. The important thing was that the Bear Brothers had already taken over Tortola's position and became the main MT. Xueqi frowned. With the support of the entire plane, Lager's combat strength was a little beyond imagination. Xueqi, are you done yet? Cenarius was already a little anxious. One's personality determined one's fighting style. Xueqi's personality of planning before taking action meant that he wasn't the type to attack fiercely the moment he appeared, unless he had the ability to absolutely crush his opponent. Contrary to the way he instantly killed the broodmother Beth Tillich, after Xueqi started fighting, he spent most of his time throwing frost arrows unhurriedly and occasionally saving the situation. In fact, Xueqi was taking drastic measures to fight with Ragnaros for the elemental dominance of the Saffron Fortress and even the entire Land of Fire. Not every demigod had the ability to multitask like him. Most powerhouses could only focus on one thing at a certain time. Lager was desperately defending against the attacks of many demigods in reality, so he couldn't focus on controlling the elemental dominance over a wide area. In a sense, Xueqi was fiercely waving his hoe and trying to take advantage of Lager's weakness. Xueqi was generally very successful. The only problem was that Lager's control over the elements was extremely rough. Generally speaking, the most standard way to fight for elemental dominance was to inject one's will into the elemental energy mass. When the element completely acted according to one's will, one would obtain the control over that element. It was a competition of the resistance and invasion of one's will. However, Lager didn't fight against Xueqi at all. Invasion of Xueqi's will? Alright. Lager directly gave this mass of elemental energy to Xueqi. The next second, he directly used an even greater amount of fire elements to break Xueqi's control over that mass of energy. To achieve elemental dominance, there was a minimum amount of will that needed to be injected per unit volume. What Lager did was to continuously hurt people with his own will. More and more fire elements rushed in at high speed, constantly diluting Xueqi's willpower, so that Xueqi couldn't form absolute control over any of the fire elements. Chapter 1825. For a short period of time, Ragnaros was indeed able to effectively resist the invasion of Xueqi's will. He did not give up control of the fire elements. However, Xueqi's will never stopped invading. As time went on, when Lager was unable to inject more fire elements to maintain a diluted state, or if he used elements that Xueqi had not invaded to replace them, Xueqi would seize control of the entire Land of Fire much faster than before. This was a classic double-edged sword. Lager was betting that he could get rid of Xueqi and his gang before Xueqi seized power. To be honest, at this point, Xueqi was no longer in a hurry. Lager's method was actually very much in line with his fiery temper. Pure fire element was like a one-shot attack. If he could not kill the enemy, he would die of exhaustion. In a sense, fire element was not very compatible with Xueqi's temperament. Xueqi was completely relying on his rich knowledge of thermodynamics as a transmigrator, and the help of the system to snatch the meat from Lager. If it was just a simple battle between Xueqi and Lager, Xueqi might really be exhausted to death by Lager, who had more resources and the geographical advantage. Unfortunately, Since Lord Lager loudly said that he wanted to burn the entire Azeroth to ashes, then don't blame the will of the planet Azeroth for sending a bunch of big shots to kill you. The 4 major elemental realms approached Azeroth and broke through the spatial barrier. In turn, Azeroth instructed Isera to resurrect more demigods to fight back. This was originally a counterattack in line with the will of the planet. As Xueqi began to suppress Ragnaros in the amount of elements in the Land of Fire, Lager was busy dealing with Xueqi and did not have the time to use fire elements to repel other elements. This also indirectly freed a certain demigod. Lager wanted to win quickly, but he was being too presumptuous. The demigod team had Cenarius, the super healer, on their side. Body-devouring flames. Ragnaros raised his hand and immediately covered 1/3 of the platform with flames. Several mortal heroes and demigods who couldn't dodge in time were bathed in flames. Tranquility. Cenarius raised both his arms and used a powerful healing skill to restore all of his HP back to full. Fiery world. Lager turned his surroundings into a sea of fire again. Tranquility. Meteor strike. Lousy still. Ning. Quiet. I don't care if Lager's moves are ever-changing, Cenarius will just use tranquility to counter it. Who cares if I'm a poisonous healer or a real healer? In any case, the powerful natural healing skill had never stopped on any of the powerhouses. Of course, Lager knew that in a group fight, he had to kill the healer and healer first. After Kalia almost got into an accident, Ushik and User could be considered to have seen through Lager's thoughts. They did not do anything but stood in front of Cenarius, ensuring that they could catch the sledgehammer with their bare hands. The 2 bear monsters had thick hides and flesh, and they were able to withstand Sovra's attack, not allowing Cenarius to be injured in the slightest, nor was his spellcasting interrupted. These 3 demigods were not the only ones that Lager had to deal with. The Raven Goddess rested for a while, then spread her wings and flew into the air to attack again. Tortola took a breath and began to prepare for battle again. The Wolf God Goldrin's attacks did not stop. This did not even include the attacks of the other mortal powerhouses. Theon, Varian, Hoof. These mortals wielding divine artifacts were not the least bit inferior to the demigods in terms of attack power. Lager wanted to use the Sons of Flames and Sons of Lava to deal with the mortals, but he helplessly realized that his underlings were no match for these mortals. Even without these big shots wielding divine artifacts, the other mortal powerhouses were enough to beat these small fire elementals into pieces. What was even more disgusting was Xueqi. As Xueqi's willpower spread through the fire elementals, Lager began to be unable to use the fire elementals to disperse the other elements into the surrounding space through the void. Using a high concentration of elements to disperse the other elements also meant that willpower had entered. Xueqi wanted to fight against Lager's willpower, so if Lager used his own willpower to fill in the gaps, wouldn't that be exactly what Xueqi wanted? Pure violence could not kill the demigods on Xueqi's side. Even if they were injured, they would not die. After a short while, even if they were on the verge of death, they would revive on the spot and continue to fight Lager. Lager felt a little powerless to fight for the control of the elements. As Lager's control over the fire elementals decreased, Cenarius, who rarely used spells other than the nature element, began to use ice element spells. As the leader of the nature element, Cenarius did not only know nature element spells. In fact, he could use many spells that were beneficial to the natural world. A torrential rain suddenly came and extinguished many of Ragnaros' flames. Duke, who had his hands free, summoned quite a number of ice barriers, and even huge ice walls. Any living meteors summoned by Ragnaros would perish as soon as they entered the range of the ice barriers. Unknowingly, the scales of victory were tilting towards Xueqi's Azeroth powerhouses. This time, Lager finally felt a great threat. He realized that even in his own lair, he would not be a match for these ferocious demigods in a head-on battle. An indignant roar reverberated throughout the entire fortress. Lager's roar shook the eardrums of every powerhouse. Bastards! Do you think this is the end? No. The Land of Fire is mine. All the fire elementals in this world are mine too. No one can steal my power. Despicable thief, Duke Marcus. I'll fight you now. It seemed like Lager was ready to fight Xueqi alone. Unexpectedly, he was as ferocious as a tiger, but in the end, he was a coward. Ragnaros actually used the gigantic Sovras to sweep it horizontally, forcing back all the demigods and humans who were close to him. Then, he dove into the lava lake again. However, this was not as simple as sneaking in to recover his HP. Instead, he was attempting to enter the most mysterious and heavily guarded independent space in the fire elemental realm. Without being disturbed by the outside world, he would focus on seizing control of the fire elemental realm from Duke. Oh no! That coward is running away. Although Duque had long expected that Lager would be a coward, he did not expect that this guy would actually want to run away in the third stage. Duque really wanted to yell, "Director! This villain is acting on his own instead of following the script." Fortunately, Duque is not alone. Behind him, there were many people doing odd jobs. When Duque held a tiche and used the power of space to block the entrance of the lava lake where Ragnaros dived into, the other demigods exerted their strength. Humph! Briar and Bramble stretched out their huge claws, and their 4 bare paws directly grabbed the entrance that Lager was trying to close. They would not close it no matter what. Chapter 1826. Good job! Cenarius waved his hands and made a fishing gesture. A thick vine appeared out of thin air and flew into the middle of the lava lake. A vine that was not much thicker than a person's thigh was thrown into the churning lava lake that was at least 10,000 degrees Celsius. No matter how one looked at it, it was no different from throwing a meat bun at a dog. Under normal circumstances, everyone would be able to see this vine turn into a rope of fire. However, in a battle between demigods, it was never a test of form, but a contest of divine power. Be it energy or elements, there had never been absolute restraints. After obtaining the even more mysterious and powerful Titan force in the universe, everyone was even more clear that all the different types of elements were just different manifestations of energy. Under certain conditions, elements could transform into each other. If not for the fact that everyone had worked together to weaken Lager's vitality to a certain extent, and Duque had stolen a lot of Lager's elements while everyone was besieging Lager, Cenarius would never have let the vine, which had condensed most of his divine power, be thrown into the lava lake. The plant element was already at a disadvantage against the fire element. Now, it was completely different. Even though it was a vine that was thrown in, Cenarius could completely feel that the lava would silently separate after touching his vine. It felt like what he had thrown in was not his own vine of life, but a real fishing line on a fishing rod. Around the fishing line was not the terrifying lava that could destroy the world, but ordinary clear water. It was as easy as fishing in a small river in the Grey Valley Forest. If Ragnaros, the Fire Demon King, was also considered a fish, then he must be a big fish. A super big fish. Originally, it was absolutely impossible to see one's own fingers in the lava. The Logia vine had no detection ability at all in there. Under the guidance of Duque's fire element spy, the vine that was connected to Cenarius' life and soul easily found Lager, who had not dived too deep. It smoothly tied a slippery knot on Lager's neck and directly pulled Ragnaros' body. "I caught him! Come and help!" Cenarius yelled. Apart from Duque, who was still leaning on a tiche and focused on preventing the spatial rift from closing, almost all the demigods rushed to Cenarius' side. The turtle god Tatora arched his body and made his turtle shell the fulcrum of the vines. Xiong Da and Xiong Air were the strongest. They grabbed the vines and pulled them out like a tug of war. Goldring's strength was not too weak. He bit at the very end of the vine and used all his strength to pull it towards the walkway leading to the platform. What was hilarious was that the demigod fire demon hunter Shanox, who had been watching from afar and was too embarrassed to do anything, or rather, he was afraid of angering Lager, his old master, but he also came to help. As the saying goes, everyone kicks a wall when it's down. Lager relied on his gigantic physique, which was at least 10 stories tall, to begin with. However, there were too many demigods here. Apart from the Raven Goddess and Cenarius, who were slightly weaker in strength, the others were all demigods with decent strength. As the saying went, who could be blamed for challenging the entire world in a moment of excitement? With the combined efforts of the group of demigods, Lager could not even be a coward this time. He was directly pulled out of the final safe haven. "I'll separate him from the land of fire," Duque yelled. The involvement of Cenarius and the other demigods undoubtedly separated Lager's god. While Lager was busy struggling in the lava lake, Duque suddenly increased the pace of his attacks. Many mortal heroes noticed that the lava lake that Lager had dived into had started to cool down. Even though they could still see the golden light shining from below, the surface of the lava lake had undoubtedly started to solidify. It was a grayish-black color that appeared after volcanic ash cooled down. The next moment, Lager's gigantic upper body was pulled out of the lake. In the center of the lake that was starting to cool down, Lager discovered that he could not break free from the damned vines, so he simply broke through the rock wall and stepped out with one leg. Then he used the other leg. Before the lava completely cooled down and solidified, Ragnaros's entire body finally appeared on the platform. When his gigantic body was pulled out by the vines, Hoof exclaimed when she saw Lager's appearance. "Oh my god! Lager was actually pulled out by you guys in his underpants." It would have been better if she had not said that. Now that Hoof said that, the group of Alliance heroes burst into laughter. Back in the day, Lager's clone was so high-end and magnificent. His burly upper body, domineering bracers, armor and breastplate, the gigantic fire demon warhammer that seemed to collapse mountains every time he waved it, and his lower body was constantly spinning like a fire tornado. Ragnaros, who was in the molten core, undoubtedly gave everyone a supreme epic feeling. The description of the fire demon king from the heroes made countless busybodies in the tavern sigh with emotion. The children who worshipped the heroes were also moved. What the hell was this Lager? It would have been fine if they did not look at his lower body. One look and they felt that he was not just one level lower. Although everyone could imagine that he was a humanoid creature with 2 hands and 2 legs. This Lager was only wearing a pair of short metal underpants, and his crotch armor was like a huge black iron anchor that was swinging around. It was easy to think of things like tiger penis or elephant penis. Forget about that. Compared to Lager, who was wrapped like a conical bucket, it was easy to think that Lager was actually like a sissy in a skirt who suddenly shyly went back to his room. Originally, he thought that the room was too hot, and in order to cool down, he only wore underpants and wandered around his room. It was at this moment that a bunch of unromantic bastards grabbed him out of his little nest and wanted to beat him up. This was really out of character. "You've angered me. You've really angered me. I'll come out now and crush all of you into ashes." Lager's threat might sound powerful the first time, but after hearing it for a while, it sounded like the laments of a defeated dog. Hee hee. Hee hee. At some point, the mortal heroes had already started to surround him and sneer. All the demigods were even more eager to fight. If Ragnaros was connected to the land of fire and had endless elemental energy to replenish himself, perhaps no demigod here could defeat him. However, when no one called for external help, and only used their own stored energy to have a fair duel, then there really were a few demigods who lived up to Lager's name. Son, watch Daddy's performance. It was not that Goldring did not mean to break his promise, it was just that he had suffered for a long time, and in a moment of excitement, he had forgotten. Chapter 1827. It had to be said that the wolf god's all-out attack was quite ferocious. At least in the first round, Lager could not keep up with Goldring's speed at all. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Dozens of claw shadows tore through the air and quickly streaked across the void, imprinting themselves on Lager's huge body and causing him considerable damage. Ragnaros was not an earth elemental giant, and he did not have a body that could knock the teeth out of dragons. Other than the few metal armor on his body, Lager was dressed like a berserker. If he changed to a shield and changed his hammer to a spear, he would look like a Spartan with 300 red underpants. In a rage, Lager swung his hammer at Goldring. Unfortunately, the difference in size and speed made Lager look like a human lord trying to deal with a white mouse that had crawled all over his body. The waist between Lager's breastplate and belt was as big as a racecourse for Goldring. If Lager had focused all his attention on Goldring, the Bear Brothers would have already arrived. Oh ha, 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 ha. 2 pairs of bear paws flew up and down, each of them able to hit a large patch of lava from Lager's waist. When Lager tried to send these 2 huge opponents flying with a sweep, it was Tortoise God Totora's turn to face his hammer. When he released a large-scale fire spell, it was Duque and Iwina's long-range attacks. Iwina's attack power was limited, and could only be considered a nuisance at most. Duque, the thief who had stolen the origin of fire, was the one who was aggressive. Just think about it, even Cenarius had started casting frost spells. How could Duque, the demigod of the weave, not attack? A terrifying icicle large enough to make Orgrimmar the main beam of the Great Hall of the Great Chieftain appeared out of thin air and stabbed straight at Lager. The 15-meter-long icicle was sharp at the front and thick at the back. It was a fatal nail. Lager could imagine that if he was stabbed by this icicle, he would be in big trouble. The icicle contained terrifying frost elements, and he felt as if Duque had forcefully compressed an entire iceberg into this icicle. Meteor! He could no longer care about anything else. A huge fiery meteor suddenly solidified in mid-air. With extreme precision, it struck Xueqi's icicle from above. A victorious smile appeared on Xueqi's face. "I'm not afraid that you won't fight back. I'm only afraid that you won't accept my challenge." To condense a fireball, one needed to inject willpower. Xueqi was such a scoundrel. As soon as Lager put his will in, Xueqi's willpower would follow. The two wills launched a fierce attack in the air in a way that mortals couldn't see. One side was furious. One side was a grindstone made of flesh and blood. It spun continuously like a tornado, grinding away at Lager's willpower. Lager was a veteran demigod and the only master of the fire elemental realm for tens of thousands of years. His strength was unquestionable. Unfortunately, as the saying goes, 2 fists are no match for 4 hands. The icicles that Xueqi threw at him were enough to keep Ragnaros busy. Not to mention the demigod fire demon hunter who was trying his best to please his new master, 6 gods of the wilderness, and more than half of the mortal hero group. Countless injuries were left on Ragnaros' burly and huge body. For a moment, he wished that his body was covered in armor. Then, he wouldn't have to suffer so many physical injuries for no reason. Right now, he was like a water bag riddled with holes. Magma was gushing out from almost every corner of his body. In the past, the magma was just a part of his body that he constantly replaced. Now it was his life force that would never return. Xueqi Marcus. Ragnaros let out the loudest roar since the start of the battle. He raised his Sovra's warhammer high and bent his body backward. He didn't even notice that the middle finger of his naturally extended left hand was bitten off by Goldring. Lager was going all out. Right at this moment, the space that was filled with red and yellow was dyed with a more dazzling golden line. Xueqi disappeared. A mage's most common spell was Flash. 499. 99% of the mages in the world, Flash was only a spell used for escaping. Even after Xueqi transmigrated, it had been like this for a long time. This time, it was a little different. Between the afterimage that he left at the place where he used Flash and the figure that appeared in the air behind Lager after he flashed, there was a thin golden line connecting the afterimage and the body. Only the top demigods who paid the most attention to the overall situation would notice that there was a hole in Lager's seemingly thick and hard black metal breastplate. A hole that could allow a human to pass through. Through this hole, the thin golden line continued to extend backward. It pierced through the northern wall of Sapron Fortress outside the huge lava lake, and even the spatial barrier of the Land of Fire. At this moment, on Xueqi's Song of Light and Shadow, there was a fist-sized crimson bead. It wasn't quite right to call it a bead, because those with sharp eyes, such as the crow goddess Avina, were surprised to see that the bead was contracting and expanding like a human heart. It was pulsating. It was similar to the beating of a heart. If one was observant enough, they would notice that as the bead was pierced, its pulsation became slower and slower, and the pulsation became smaller and smaller. This is... Cenarius couldn't believe his eyes. Ragnaros, whose chest had been pierced, finally showed a second expression other than anger. It was a look of horror and fear. Lager let out a scream that didn't match his usual deep voice. No. A very strange scene happened. He thought that as the king of fire demons and the ruler of the Land of Fire, Ragnaros' death would be grand and heroic. Even if it was T. It should be a big explosion. A mushroom cloud or something. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. When Xueqi stabbed Ragnaros with his sword and took away the last 1% of his HP, Lager's death only melted like a candle under high temperature. The 10-story tall body turned into the most common form of lava in the Land of Fire. It began to melt and flow in all directions, flowing back into the lava lake through the holes on the platform. His pauldrons, breastplates and bracers, which weighed at least 100 tons, all slid down along the melting body and finally fell off the body of the king of fire demons. The earthworm-shaped runes on the equipment that were once shining dimmed. If it weren't for the huge equipment that still retained the appearance of the Titans, one would even think that they were natural scrap metal and not the equipment of the once glorious king of fire demons. Chapter 1828. To the veterans of the hero team. Oh, the veteran team members, this was just another feat worthy of praise by the Great Alliance hero team. At least this time, the bard in the tavern could officially change the killing of Lager's clone from 10 years ago to killing the fire demon king. The wilderness demigods who were working with the hero team for the first time could not help but open their mouths wide. They did not seem to believe that Lager was killed just like that. Looking at the flame bead that was probably the core of Lager's soul on the divine weapon rapier, Cenarius still did not seem to believe it. Ragnaros has been completely destroyed? A ball of flame suddenly spewed out from under the platform, giving everyone a fright. Unexpectedly, the flames that sprang out were as docile as a puppy, supporting Duque's feet with incomparable gentleness. Duque took the opportunity to sit back, and the pillar of flames suddenly transformed in less than a tenth of a second, becoming a pure flame throne. A brand new crown formed by the purest fire elements was crowned on Duque's forehead. Sitting on the brand new flame throne, Duque used his divine will, and the throne made a gorgeous turn on its own. Duque was now facing his companions who had come to challenge Lager, as well as the demigods. Every powerhouse could not help but purse their lips or move their lips, quietly waiting for Duque to speak. Duque tilted his head thoughtfully, because both he and the other existences heard a funny voice. No! You can't destroy me. I am the eternal king of fire. I am the terminator of all things in the world. Duque put Atish back into the space storage bag and used his free left hand to pluck the flame bead that had not completely stopped beating. One could feel the violent wrath of thousands of vengeful spirits gathering on it. It was an irrepentant irritation. It was an eternal roar. Duque's lips curled into a smile. Yes. Very good. As expected, this is the real Fire Demon King. I'll be very disappointed if you suddenly admit defeat at the very end. Duque looked into the eyes of the two fire demon leaders and saw the desire and fear in their eyes. However, they quickly recognized their situation and bowed their heads deeply to Duque. As traitors, all the fire demons had complicated feelings. On the one hand, they wanted Duque to completely destroy Ragnaros, so that their history of being a traitor would be completely annihilated, and no one would ever come to take revenge on them. Major Domo Executus, who was well aware of the balance of power, knew that if Duque spared Lager's life, it would be a standard imperial study. A traitor. A person who had been betrayed and surrendered. This kind of natural opposition doomed the fire demon's future to be miserable. It was not that Duque had no precedent of forcing a demigod of a foreign race to surrender. Not to mention others, the Karaji twin emperors were the best example. For a moment, Shaynox wanted to say something to see if he could urge Duque to destroy Lager. Instead, it was Major Domo who grabbed this powerful but not so smart former subordinate. Major Domo shook his head almost imperceptibly. Duque looked at the two fire demon leaders who had lowered their heads, smiled, and crushed the lava core that carried the last of Lager's soul. No, for a moment, an unprecedentedly violent impact of the soul and divinity directly blasted into Duque's spiritual world. The next moment, the sky and the earth changed color. The lava at the bottom of the platform, the ruins around Saffron Fortress, and even the lava that splashed on the surrounding walls, all dimmed at this moment. It was very obvious that the temperature of the air began to drop. Even without Duque's ice shield, the temperature of the surrounding environment was still unbearably high, but the terrible pressure that could destroy everything at any time was gone. In a broad sense, the Land of Fire was a very vast place. After the Land of Fire overlapped with planet Azeroth, it occupied at least the entire southern foothills of Mount Hyjal. On the defense line close to the north, a large number of low-level and mid-level fire elemental creatures were crazily attacking the defense line formed by Guardian Hyjal, the Night Elves, and the Dalajan Mages. Unlike the casual leveling at the beginning, as the Land of Fire further integrated with the world, the stability of the space brought more mid-level and high-level fire elemental creatures. In fact, the defense line was already tight in many places, and was even broken at one point. It was all thanks to the elite mages and mages sent by the Dalajan Mages to retake the position. Suddenly, all the fire elemental creatures stopped attacking. They could not even fight back in the face of the allied army's attack. Not only the fire elemental creatures, but all the soldiers of the allied army who had a certain level of elemental perception felt an inexplicable throbbing in their hearts. Be it the allied army or the fire elemental creatures, they all turned their heads and looked towards the south. In the impression of mortals and fire elemental creatures, the Land of Fire was always a world of jumping and violent activity. There were erupting volcanoes everywhere, and rivers of lava would suddenly appear across the land, attacking other fire elemental creatures. It was a place of intense combat that was countless times more brutal than the law of the jungle. However, what entered their eyes now was a world filled with bright colors, but it was peaceful and still. From an incredibly intense and dynamic scene, it had turned into a world that was almost still. Such an exaggerated transformation was only due to the dissipation of a supreme will. the world of fire elemental creatures became quiet and serene. The entire world of fire seemed to have calmed down, obediently and silently prostrating towards the new Lord of Flames. It was practically the most humble servant. On the Flame Monarch, Xueqi widened his eyes. Anyone could see that a ball of golden flames was burning in Xueqi's eyes, growing stronger and stronger. Xueqi could clearly feel that his will, which had once been difficult to advance in this world, could now soar freely and extend as it pleased. At this moment, all the new mages connected to the weave could feel the laws of fire magic in the entire weave undergoing a huge change. Not long ago, fire magic had always required the most spiritual force out of the three main types of magic. It was like a free wild horse, refusing to be enslaved in any way. Now, powerful fire elemental creatures seemed to be fearful as they lowered their prideful heads towards the mages. Not long ago, due to the conflict between Ragnaros and Xueqi, every mage had a strict limit on the quantity and quality of fire magic they could use each day. Now, new energy had been injected. The master of this mighty magic network, Duke Marcus, had officially announced that the entire fire elemental plane would be under the control of the weave. From today onwards, fire magic and spiritual force will be sold at half price. Xueqi announced. Chapter 1829. Whether it was the mages on duty far away in Northrend, the various posts in the Eastern Kingdom, or the mages at the front lines of Mount Hyjal, they all welcomed Xueqi's policy of having the price of mental strength for fire magic. All along, the destructive power of fire magic had been the undisputed leader among the three elements. But in this life, because Du had led a team to fight against Ragnaros' clone in the Molten Core and created the magic net, the use of mental strength for fire magic was much higher than in history. Unfortunately, there was a limit to the number of times it could be used. Now that the price of mental strength for a fire spell was halved, the cost-effectiveness of fire magic was far higher than that of ice and arcane magic. It could be imagined that from today onwards, there would be more followers of the Five Fireball Church. This was just the benefit of selling themselves to Pharaoh for the magic net. The greater benefit was at the defensive line of Mount Hyjal. I know that the mages at the front lines have made outstanding contributions and great sacrifices in order to protect the world. As the new master of the Land of Fire, I allow you to contract these fire elemental creatures as you wish, as long as it doesn't exceed your own mental strength. Xueqi's announcement sent the entire Dalajan into another kind of uproar. The development of magic changed with each passing day. Ever since the battle at the Molten Core, the Dalajan mages led by Xueqi had greatly strengthened the spell, Summon Water Elemental. The summoned water elemental creatures would improve along with the master's strength. Of course, the main reason was that as the master, the spellcaster had greater control. Another important reason was that Xueqi had negotiated a mutually beneficial deal with the Haydatian Water Elemental. The Haydatian Water Elemental would summon its people and compatriots to respond to the summons of the magic net mages. So in this life, Pharaoh's Water Elemental was definitely stronger than the Horde's. Everyone knew that Pharaoh could summon water elemental creatures. As long as the summoning was not cancelled, the water elemental creatures would follow the mages around. Let alone attack, they would even be quiet decorations until the mages gave the order to attack. However, mages never had a spell like Summon Fire Elemental. It was awkward just thinking about it. Pharaoh, who was an ice mage, could find a water elemental pet. As long as he paid a small amount of spiritual energy, an ice mage could even let the water elemental pet stay by his bed as a guard while he went to sleep. The water elemental was not annoyed. If you wanted to perform, it would quietly watch you act cool. If you wanted it to beat someone up, it would shoot frost arrows. If you wanted it to be a bodyguard, it would beat up whoever beat you up. The water element was so useful that the majority of fire mages couldn't accept it. Fire mages would eat their own food. This kind of misery could only be experienced by the fire elementalist himself. For a long period of time, be it the Alliance or the Horde, they used ice magic more than fire magic. There was no other reason. The survivability of the ice element was much stronger, and it was very useful. Now that Xueqi had taken control of the Land of Fire and become the master of the fire elemental realm, the entire world of magic seemed to have been turned upside down. It wasn't that there were no fire mages who wanted to use fire elemental creatures as long-term summons. Those imaginative Dalajan pioneers even tried to enslave the summoned fire elemental creatures by imitating the warlock's method of enslaving demons. The results were terrible. Fire elemental creatures not only consumed more of Pharaoh's spiritual energy, but more importantly, Fire elemental creatures were extremely irritable. If they were unhappy, they would rather self-destruct than listen to a mere mortal's orders. It was this characteristic that made enslavement of the fire elemental essence an unstable, semi-forbidden magic that made it so that I would rather perish than let you off. Of course, it wasn't that fire elemental couldn't be summoned. For example, the shamans were very good at this. Through the fire elemental totem, they could summon the fire elemental for a short period of time to help fight monsters. Short-term summons were different from long-term bodyguards. Moreover, in reality, the shaman's ability to summon fire elemental was extremely limited. They would first contact the fire elemental realm with their spiritual energy, then humbly ask for the fire elemental's help through spiritual communication. Under normal circumstances, the fire elemental totem would be effective. But the fire elemental could ignore you. This meant that the fire elemental totem in this world wasn't very effective in actual combat. Unless it was a radiant moon mage with extremely high spiritual energy, very few people would enslave the fire elemental. Even if there were people who used it, they would mostly use the fire elemental as bombs or walking self-destruct soldiers. Duque's order for the fire elemental to submit to mortals was a completely subversive move. Using their own spiritual energy to attract the fire elemental and condense it into a fireman couldn't possibly have its own will. How could the summoned fire elemental fight? Summoning elemental creatures required constant expenditure of spiritual energy. But conversely, the summoner didn't have to worry about every attack of the elemental creatures. How could one fire elemental compare to two fire elemental creatures? In previous battles, the fire elemental would be at the front while the mages would drink tea at the back. For a moment, the pharaoh at the front line of Mount Hyjal was full of ideas, and all sorts of new tricks were developed almost instantly. Some people contracted 4 fire elemental creatures and really played with 5 fireball gods. Some people contracted more than 10 inferno imps in one go and played with group fire arrows. There were also people who had designs on the molten demon hounds. What the hell? They actually contracted smaller molten demon hounds as mounts. That was so cool that others would die of envy. There was even an ice mage at the Morning Star rank who tried to contract multiple fire elemental creatures. He succeeded, and then summoned a fire elemental and a water elemental at the same time. Unfortunately, before he could truly experience what it felt like to have ice and fire at the same time, the water and fire elemental creatures under him started fighting among themselves. It wasn't a small fight, but a fight to the death. This was amazing. 2 mages had clearly summoned a water elemental and a fire elemental each. Even if they stood at the side, it would be fine. Why did a mage summon 2 elemental creatures of opposite attributes at the same time and start fighting? There were too many things that made the Mount Hyjal defense line a little lively, and even messy. If not for the fact that these alliance mages had fought alongside the Night Elves and defended Mount Hyjal to the death not long ago, the old fogies of the Night Elves would have flown into a rage and chased them all away. Don't King cause trouble in our holy mountain. Duque knew a thing or two about the situation outside. He didn't have time to care. It couldn't be helped. If he killed Ragnaros as an outsider, the fire elemental creatures wouldn't think much of it. Then the fire elemental creatures wouldn't think much of it. Even if Duque and the rest killed all the fire elemental creatures in the entire Land of Fire, it wouldn't matter. Chapter 1830. The characteristics of the Land of Flames meant that new fire elemental creatures would be born here at all times. They would follow the instincts of fire creatures and keep fighting, devouring, and growing. Perhaps in a few years, another Lord of Flames named the Great Loggerscrew would be born, and he would bring a large force to Mount Hyjal to cause trouble. If that was the case, the Night Elves would not have peace. This time, it was the king's flag at the top of the city wall. As a demigod, Duque overthrew Logger's rule and injected his will into the entire Land of Flames. The nature was completely different. Duque was the new king of flames. After Duque killed Logger, no one stopped Duque's will from pouring into the entire Land of Flames. The vast willpower that was as vast as the heaven and earth began to invade the entire Land of Flames unscrupulously. Duque's will was like the roots of a tree, penetrating, rooting, and sprouting into every crevice in the Land of Flames and every place with high concentration of elemental energy. After Duque completely controlled everything, the ancient elemental language with a mysterious rhythm echoed in the entire fire elemental realm. I am the weave demigod Duke Marcus of Azeroth, who controls the 3 major elements of fire, frost, and arcane spells. In the battle with your old king, Ragnaros, it ended with my absolute victory. Now, I hereby declare that I am the only master of the Land of Flames, the supreme ruler of billions of fire elemental creatures. Who agrees? Who objects? Perhaps in the eyes of mortals, Xueqi had already led outsiders to defeat all the bosses in the Land of Flames. There shouldn't be anyone stupid enough to come and seek death, right? Don't say it. There really is. Me. Pyros, will be the first to disagree. I acknowledge your power, but you're not a fire elemental creature. What right do you have to be our king? A rather powerful will rose from the southeast of Saffron Fortress. His will and his voice immediately received the response of many fire elemental creatures. Hee. Speaking of which, Xueqi also felt that he was a bit shameless. After all, he was a human, not a real fire elemental creature. Although Azeroth had accepted him and allowed him to become a demigod that transcended the mortal world, in theory, he had already surpassed the boundaries of human beings. However, racial discrimination was not something that only existed in the human world. It wasn't like people would worship you like a god just because you became a demigod. Look, isn't William also unwilling to call Wolf Papa father? Goldring and William were on the same side. Of course, William couldn't do anything to the wolf god. Xueqi and this guy who called himself Pyros weren't on the same side. After controlling the Land of Fire, this world of fire would become Xueqi's backyard. A huge eye opened above the head of the powerful will. It was a pure flaming eye. It was enormous, mysterious, and carried with it an irresistible pressure. This was the terrifying aura from the new Flame King. Xueqi could clearly see who the opponent was. Pyros was a lava giant. Hot lava flowed all over his body, but he lacked a rock layer that was hard enough to protect his body. However, the temperature of the fire elements on his body wasn't too high. Most importantly, Xueqi remembered who he was. He was the son of Lord Leolis, who had just been killed and was commonly known as left and right legs by the players. Xueqi, who was sitting on the flame throne, had a contemptuous smile on his face. Indeed, a family should be neat and tidy, right? His father's corpse hasn't even turned cold, and it's his son's turn soon. This sentence caused the Alliance powerhouses and demigods who were watching this scene from the huge flame screen to reveal a playful smile. Xueqi flicked his finger, and a huge flaming tornado appeared above Pyro's head. In less than 3 seconds, this huge flaming tornado compressed a massive amount of fire elements at an extremely high intensity. Under the gaze of all the fire elemental creatures within a radius of several kilometers, it turned into a huge fist. The atmosphere was rioting. All the conscious elemental creatures fled the area in fear. Pyro sensed in shock that the power he was familiar with was leaving him, and an even greater and boundless power from the true master of this world of flames was about to descend. This flaming fist wasn't something a little lava giant leader like him could withstand. He didn't beg for mercy, nor did he resist. He just stared blankly as Xueqi's uncontrollable power dominated and took over the surrounding space. That's right. Xueqi was showing off his prowess. And he was the chicken that Xueqi killed to show the still untamed fire elemental creatures of this world. Asterisk boom. Asterisk the huge flaming fist finally descended. This wasn't a simple physical attack, but an elemental bombardment through and through. A thick pillar of fire that would take 30 people to wrap their arms around connected the ground where Pyros stood with the endless flaming sky. This rather powerful lava giant leader, who should have survived until return of the Legion, before dying, just like that, his soul and body were reduced to dust in this fiery land. Just like that, Lord Riolis's lineage disappeared from the history of the Land of Fire forever. More flaming eyes appeared in the sky of the Land of Flames. They used their sharp gazes to sweep across all the fire elemental creatures on the scorching land. As the flaming eyes blinked, a sharp voice rang in the ears of every fire elemental creature. Who? Who else? Who disobeyed the rule of the new Lord of Flames, Duke Marcus? Is it you? Is it you? Or is it you? As if he was calling names, Xueqi sent his majesty and will down on the heads of the relatively powerful second-tier leaders. The mother of Nightmare Spider Besterak was dead, but that didn't mean that the entire Nightmare Spider race was wiped out. Under the mother of Nightmare Spiders, there was actually a group of powerful Nightmare Spider Lords, and the most outstanding among them was Jurixia. When Xueqi's will descended on her head, her 6 legs almost instinctively turned to jelly. She knelt on the ground on the spot and curled up into a ball. Jurixia, of course, obeys your rule. I am a servant who serves the Supreme Lord of Flames, Duke Marcus. Very good. Duke's voice came from the flaming eyes. As a powerful nightmare spider who obeys me, I grant you the title of Nightmare Spider Mother. But there are other powerful nightmare spider lords. Her grievance only lasted for a second. Suddenly, within a few kilometers of her territory, 5 or 6 miserable screams came at the same time. Those were the final cries of the Spider Mother, who was at the same level as her. Enemies who used to be at the same level as her were instantly turned into ashes. The new Lord of Flames, Xueqi, was actually so powerful. Chapter 1831. Not daring to struggle or resist at all, the new broodmother kept her curled-up body and offered her humble loyalty to the new master of the Land of Fire in her own way. None of the spiders in this world were trustworthy. Most arachnid creatures had sinister, cunning, and unpredictable characteristics. Xueqi didn't care, because he wouldn't bother to pay attention to a broodmother who wasn't even a demigod. Since he was the king in the Land of Fire, Major Domo would become the manager of this place again in 10 years. Under one person. Above all others. He was talking about the Fire Demon Supervisor. Moreover, Major Domo used the former broodmother's flame core to become a demigod. How could he be on good terms with this broodmother? Xueqi didn't say anything and just smiled. He used to think that all the masters in the fire elemental realm had been wiped out. Now he realized that he was taking things for granted. If he didn't control all of the fire elemental realm, he wouldn't have known that Smodron, who was supposed to be one of the 4 elemental lords in the original history, was actually quite powerful at this point in time. He wasn't in the narrow scope of the Land of Fire. Instead, he was near Grey Valley. As a lesser lord, he restrained his subordinates and didn't let too many fire elemental creatures rush into Grey Valley to set it on fire. To the Great Supreme of Fire, I, Smodron, offer my loyalty. The fire elemental lord who looked like the gatekeeper, Belloc, knelt on one knee before the huge Eye of Fire. Don't you dislike me because I'm a human? Xueqi's booming voice came from the Eye of Fire. In my eyes, fire elemental creatures are no different from other creatures. That's why I've always opposed Ragnaros's plan to destroy the entire world of Azeroth. I lacked the strength to fight against him, so I exiled myself to this remote place. Smodron was speaking the truth. The fire elemental density in his territory was obviously far less than in Logger's lair. Of course, if he had been recruited by Logger earlier, he would have been lying on the ground like the other stubborn fire elemental lords, and even his flame core had been dug out and devoured. Xueqi was quite satisfied with this guy. Very good. Come to my throne room, and I will grant you your rightful place. A huge door of flames opened in the void. Smodron did not resist and walked in directly. When he came back to his senses, he saw Xueqi surrounded by a group of fire demons and a group of demigods. Without much to say, he knelt down on one knee and swore his loyalty. The ceremony was completed. In terms of pure strength, Smodron was definitely the strongest among Xueqi's fire element subordinates. First come, first served. Xueqi had to give the loyal Major Domo a higher status. For the time being, apart from Duke, Major Domo and Nox were ranked second, and Smodron was third. Major Domo was ranked first in the fire elemental world. In the long run, Xueqi would consider giving Smodron the second position after he made a contribution. This was a check and balance, as well as a test of strength. But that was a matter for the future. Dominating the Land of Fire and becoming the king of one of the 4 major elemental realms, Xueqi's value would definitely rise. Considering Xueqi's characteristics as the pharaoh, it was not hard to imagine that he would definitely attack the Tidehunter's water elemental realm. But right now, everything was unknown. Attacking the Land of Fire was not only to help Mount Hyjal, but also to help the world of Azeroth. Xueqi could feel the gratitude from the half-asleep will of Azeroth. Since Xueqi killed Logger and got the biggest benefit, he was too embarrassed to take the rest of the spoils. Xueqi did not know what was going on with the mortal equipment in Logger's hands. In any case, Logger was dead, so he just dug out a bunch of mortal equipment from Logger's lair like a treasure chest. Kale, that speculated that this might be the equipment of the Titans who imprisoned Logger. No matter what, this batch of equipment was definitely the best batch he had encountered so far. Arathar's Eye of Flames was an epic longbow with a unique design of flames. The huge handguard on the bow also functioned as a gauntlet. Among the disc-shaped patterns on the bow, there was a sun-like core that burned with inextinguishable flames. Tyrant, Chandries, and Lilith naturally accepted such powerful bows. There were 3 of them, and they were of such high quality. A cloth armor, Flame Manager's sash, was originally taken back by Lager after Major Domo Executus' betrayal. Now, it was more like a symbol of power that Duque had given to this fire demon leader. In addition, there were 3 Shulev. Staff of Annihilation. The shape of this staff and the head of the staff looked a bit like the holy light creature Naru. This was because every piece of gold and rose-red metal in the shape of flames was suspended in the air, surrounding the energy gem that shone with a mysterious radiance at the head of the staff. It was not very powerful to call it an energy gem. In standard terms, it was an energy formation that was solidified at the head of the staff. The mysterious energy of destruction was fixed at the head of the staff in a whirlpool-like manner, constantly absorbing the surrounding elemental energy to provide more powerful magic power for the owner of the staff. This standard staff not only provided powerful bonuses in endurance and intelligence, but also had a super high additional bonus in magic circuits. It was no exaggeration to say that the increase in magic power far exceeded the total magic power of a radiant moon mage. Only Breaking Dawn archmages and demigods like Duque could use this staff. There were 3. One was given to Kai, one was kept for Jaina, and Duque took one for himself as a souvenir. Kagwin Balrog King's War Hammer was actually a milk hammer that increased magic power. Because of its powerful comprehensive properties, as well as the increase in spirit and level acceleration, he kept it. When Riadaline returned, he stuffed it into the Blood Elf Knight leader's hands. The bastard Gavin Rad actually had the nerve to imitate Riadaline's speech, pinching his throat and shouting, "Boo-hoo! Are you trying to make me never return on the path of healing?" If Riadaline heard this, she would probably want to cry. It couldn't be helped. These days, the Holy Knight heroes were all triple elemental Holy Knights. Riadaline wasn't the best at fighting, so she was naturally thrown into the role of a healer. The other Holy Knights each had an offensive divine artifact. They couldn't let it go to waste, could they? The group imagined Riadaline, who couldn't complain, especially the Holy Knights, and felt weird. Especially the Hoof who had been playing around with happy flames. She touched the back of her head in embarrassment and laughed foolishly. If she hadn't obtained happy flames, which was originally Morning Shadow, she would probably have been thrown into the healing team sooner or later. Chapter 1832. Here. Let's give this to Riadaline too. Let's comfort her. Duque took out the 2-handed hammer Sovra's, Hand of Burning Annihilation, and prepared to give it to Riadaline. As the war hammer that Lager had used before, this weapon had a rather impressive foundation. Even though the warhammer had shrunk to a size that could be used by humans due to the lack of a massive amount of fire elements, it was a completely different concept in the hands of a true powerhouse. However, William objected. Magni will eventually return. In fact, not only does Muradin not want to use his brother's Balrog hammer, but Magni's spiritual imprint on the hand of the Balrog has not disappeared. Even Bu Lang, who was assigned to the melee team, lacks a suitable weapon. Duque was speechless. The Alliance's hero team actually lacked defensive warriors these days. There were many professions that could tank the boss. Defensive warriors, defensive knights, wild druids, and even the new death knights. However, the people who entered the hero's domain were all unrestrained. Look at that group of bastard paladins, each of them carrying a divine weapon for damage output and whistling at the side. They could attack the monsters, but not tank them. William was a true berserker, and he couldn't possibly just give him a shield and let him tank the monster's aggro, right? What a waste of resources. In the end, the one who tanked the boss was Bronzebeard. Bu Lang, who was originally a hunter with a flintlock, was forced to go to the melee team because of the overflow of rangers in the Alliance's hero team. Dwarves had very high requirements for weapons and equipment. The top-notch God's Descent could increase the size of their equipment, but not their weapons. Hence, the Bronzebeard brothers were troubled by the need for a powerful weapon that could increase its size along with its body. After enduring for so long, the Hand of the Balrog was the most suitable weapon. Fortunately, there was an additional, Sovra's, Hand of Burning Annihilation. Next, almost all the spellcasters had a voltage transformer pulse capacitor. This thing sounded very scientific, but it wasn't scientific at all. Not only did it give Pharaoh a high increase in intelligence, but it also allowed Pharaoh to accumulate special free energy every time his magic attack was a critical hit, forming an electric charge that could be blasted out randomly. Finally they attacked the Land of Fire. After wiping out all those who resisted, they left. It was necessary for everyone to have a set of work clothes. The thief, death knight, mage, and druid all had the flame victor set. Paladin, priest, and warlock all had flame conqueror set. The warrior, ranger, and shaman all had flame protection set. It wouldn't be wrong to say that these were work clothes. In the end, these were the standard equipment left behind by the servants of the Titan giants. After killing the boss, it was the perfect time to let these items see the light of day again. Most of the time, it wasn't because of how good the set was. Even if they were all individual pieces, they wouldn't necessarily be much weaker than the set. Keeping the suit was purely a memento of an era. William, for example, had specially opened up a basement in the Storm Fortress to store his used armors. From the Courage and Strength, sets in the early Molten Core era, to the Fearless, set in the Middle Period, to the King of Emer, set in No Scent. In terms of equipment attribute bonuses, these sets were already outdated. William couldn't bear to throw them away. Firstly, these pieces of equipment couldn't be given to anyone after being soul-bound. Secondly, they were proof of his bravery. Even today, he would catch the little Prince Anduin Rin from time to time and let him look at his father's collection. It wasn't to prove how awesome his father was, but to let him learn from the vigor of a warrior. Unfortunately, little Anduin seemed to have gone further and further down the path of filth. In order to prove himself, this kid was already clamoring to join the Alliance of Heroes. He kept saying that Xueqi had stabbed Sargeras to death at this age. William's face was very dark because of this. The biggest beneficiary of killing the Fire Demon King was Xueqi. If not for Xueqi saying that there was no way to move the Land of Fire, Cenarius and the other demigods would be even happier. The fusion of space was not as simple as mortals thought. Since the Land of Fire was attached to the southern foot of Mount Hyjal, it couldn't be separated easily. Cenarius was a little indignant at first, but Isra came out in time to explain that even a true god couldn't separate such a large plane after fusing it. There was really no other way. Xueqi could only make a sacred oath in front of the guardians of Mount Hyjal. As long as he was still the boss of the Land of Fire, he would restrain the fire elemental creatures and not let them run around. In view of Isra's guarantee for Xueqi on this matter, Cenarius remained silent, which was rare. Moreover, the current situation didn't allow the naturalists to think too much, because the cataclysm brought about by the elemental invasion was still ongoing. The fire elemental world was settled, but the earth elemental world hadn't arrived yet. At least there was still wind and water. Xueqi got a group of wilderness gods out, and the Alliance of Heroes was once again in a position to attack at any time. This made the entire alliance heave a sigh of relief. In Theramore, Jaina, who welcomed Xueqi, pounced on him without any hesitation. Like a playful little girl, she hung on Xueqi's body like a koala. Xueqi smiled, hugged her light female body, and spun 1080 degrees on the spot. Xueqi, I knew you'd always be the best. Jaina was extremely excited. Let me tell you, those barbarians from the tribe haven't taken down the Twilight Fortress yet. That's normal. Xueqi didn't care too much. With Brainless Roar in power, the tribe and the alliance were destined to go further and further apart. Xueqi couldn't wait for Brainless Roar to use up all the vitality of the tribe. From a certain point of view, it was indeed a solution to solve the food shortage problem by sending people to their deaths. Unfortunately, this was a classic case of putting the cart before the horse. A race with too few people could never become the ruler of a vast land. Yes, Xueqi, do you think the tribe can take down the Twilight Fortress? Jaina asked after a passionate hug. Before Xueqi could speak, there was a cold snort from the side. Humph, impossible. No matter how weak my mother is, she's still my mother. Even if she resurrects, she'll definitely be stronger than me. The one who interrupted was naturally Onyxia. She sensed Xueqi's arrival at Theramore and flew over immediately. Xueqi curled his lips, feeling that the relationship between the Black Dragon King and his family was really interesting. On this point, Xueqi agreed. Sinestra is very strong. If it were the current Gurus, even with the Dragon Slayer Gruul, they wouldn't be her match. As long as she's here, the tribe can forget about taking down the Twilight Fortress. Xueqi turned his head and looked west, where the battle was. He smiled and thought to himself, Brainless Roar, I'll just quietly watch you show off and quietly watch you court death. Chapter 1833. Is there anything we can do now? Onyxia seemed to be eager to try. Basically, we just wait. But since I'm back, you can go to the dragon's slumber temple in my place. Xueqi gently hooked the black dragon's little nose. Is there a fight? The black dragon looked up. Are you asking if there are weaklings for you to bully? All right, there are. Xueqi smiled. Even the black dragon blushed a little. All right, since it's master's order. Xueqi turned his head back. How are things on their side? When Xueqi attacked the Land of Fire, it wasn't that Xueqi didn't have time to attend to other things. It was because Uldum and Vasker were very special places. Unless Xueqi came personally, he couldn't just use the weave to invade them. All of a sudden, the information there was sent back to the most primitive way of sending messengers. In the end, Jaina was in charge of summarizing the information. It's the final battle. Over in Uldum, Torver's Lost City and the Hall of Origins have been settled. Aurelia and Sasha have already brought people to support Sylvanas. Brian Bronzebeard was the only one left in charge of the Hall of Origins. Sister Vasker said that she found 2 new demigods and is preparing to recruit them. At the same time, she has already attacked the tidal throne and is fighting against the sea monster sect leader Ozamat. Jaina finished her report and added, "Should we send reinforcements?" Xueqi hesitated for a second, but still shook his head. No, since they chose to be independent, they should show their courage. They chose their own path, and they have to finish it even if they have to kneel. There was something else Xueqi didn't say. Unless they ask for reinforcements themselves? Xueqi raised his head and looked into the distance. He was silent for a long time. If they are willing to be the beautiful canaries in the cage, Duke does not mind giving them a crook of an arm to protect them from the storm. But they weren't just his women. They were also great heroes who shouldered the fate of the elves and led them into the future. Perhaps it was because of this persistence that the Windrunner sisters' beauty was so extraordinary and captivating. Jaina asked softly, "Before the Stonewall continent merges with Azeroth, is there anything else we can do apart from providing disaster relief and restoring production?" Xueqi shook his head. Wait and hope. Xueqi really didn't interfere. If Queen Syriana couldn't deal with Al-Akir, who was known as AWOL Trash, and Vashti couldn't deal with a sea monster suzerain, then how could he expect them to block the Burning Legion's attacks in his territory again and again in the future? Deep into the night, Xueqi was still anxious. Through the portal, Xueqi took out a large stack of reports from the Alliance and started to deal with them in the study room that Jaina had left for him. Every queen has her own bedroom and study in her own palace, or in her own summer palace. This was a form of respect and an honor. Xueqi accepted it very calmly. Hundreds of mages' eyes were reviewing the reports, and even more mages' hands were flipping through these reports. Just like that, Xueqi lay comfortably on the armchair behind the desk and let his spirit browse through the massive amount of reports. This wasn't something a human could do. Fortunately, Xueqi was no longer immortal. Knock knock. There was a knock on the door. Come in. Even without asking, Xueqi knew that it was Onyxia at the door just from the soul connection. It was rare that the Black Dragon Princess actually came wearing a high-slit cheongsam tonight. The slit that reached to the waist showed the vacuum state under the cheongsam. A dignified dragon, but walking like a cat. She climbed over gracefully and went under the desk in front of Xueqi. Well, it was one of the daily dragon taming lessons. Dragon spitting pearls. For Xueqi's convenience, Onyxia even made a pair of interesting black dragon horns on her head, which could be used as handles. There was another knock on the door. Jaina, who came in on her own, glanced at the humanoid black dragon princess under the desk. Without saying anything, she simply came up and waved her finger, and the pile of files was moved away by 2 additional hands of magic. Hey, Xueqi. I miss you. Faced with his beautiful disciple, Xueqi put on a serious face. Well, it seems that it's been a while since I discussed the academic problem of the reactions of different individual magic circuits in joint situations with you. Jaina winked. Master, please enlighten me. So, Xueqi changed from H-Ors to Ors, 7. While Xueqi waited for the progress with his mount in his left hand and a certain queen in his right hand, the Horde's attack on the Twilight Fortress finally came to an end. After all the hardships and the loss of almost 400,000 Horde soldiers, the elites led by Garush finally faced the last leader of the Twilight Fortress, the great traitor Gujar. If Gujar were still a simple 2-headed ogre, Brainless Roar probably could have cut him into pieces on his own. As a boss-level expert who had been greatly strengthened by the ancient god Zoth, Gujar became a huge problem. corruption of the ancient god, corruption, acceleration, corruption, plague, corruption, distortion, corruption, absolute. Before him, everybody had to face a cruel test of willpower. The skill, betrayal, tempted every weak-willed warrior to worship Xueqi on the spot and raise their battle axes to their companions a moment ago. The corruption of the ancient god, on the other hand, forced him to become a fallen one through all kinds of dark methods. When the corruption reached the second level of plague, he couldn't help but vomit, causing shadow damage to all his companions who were sprayed by the vomit. When the third level of distortion happened, he would automatically cause group shadow arrow damage to his companions around him. Finally, when absolute came, he would become a powerful warrior and increase his attack power by 100%, but it also meant death. When his companions betrayed him for no reason, Garush chose to kill them. When the old orc Eitrig, Thrall's advisor and expert, entered the distortion state, Garush also shouted, "Traitor!" He cut off the head of Eitrig, who was about to leave the team and was about to die by himself. The other chief's eyes were bloodshot. However, in the face of a great enemy, they could only endure the displeasure in their hearts and continue to attack Xueqi. After a fierce battle, Garush finally cut off the two heads of the traitor ogre. The problem was that he put Xueqi's head together with Eitrig's. "Ha ha ha! Hang the heads of these three traitors on the main gate of Orgrimmar," Garush ordered. Chapter 1834. For some reason, Sinestra, who should have existed in the deepest part of the Twilight Fortress, was no longer there. From this point of view, it could be concluded that the Horde had finally won the war at a heavy price. But Garush's actions had undoubtedly completely ignited the conflict between him and the other chiefs. No, Eitrig is definitely not a traitor. Everyone saw that. It was Google's vicious skill. Are you saying that a warrior profession can use shadow arrow? Wajin roared, and he opened his arms fiercely. I didn't ask for your opinion. Trolls. Garush said contemptuously. I agree with Dwerkin. Eitrig didn't want to attack us. Drano stood up, his burly figure even more oppressive than Dwerkin's slightly thin figure. Garush was not happy. He pointed his left hand at the tip of Drano's nose, almost poking the forgotten leader's nose. Shut up. I don't need a dead man to influence my decision. It was I, Garush Hellscream, who led the Horde to win this war against the traitors. I am the only one who will be the victor of this war. Remember. Dead face. In the Horde, only the winner has the final say. After saying that, he fiercely slapped the strong pectoral muscles on his chest, making loud banging sounds. Sparse cheers could be heard from the surroundings, but even more people were silent. Garush's "I" deeply stung everyone present. Not only the tribal chiefs, but even many of the elite beastmen who were clustered around the periphery felt that the word was rather harsh. Next to him, Cain, who was covered in blood from the battle just now, strode over regardless of the wounds on his body. The huge totem pole slammed into the ground, making a deafening noise and raising a lot of dust. Garush! What did you say? Are you saying that you are the only winner? Then what about the hundreds of thousands of soldiers sacrificed for this battle? Were those orcs cannon fodder? Were more than half of our Tauren, trolls, and Forsaken warriors just stepping stones for your prestige? The Tauren chief, who was as huge as a hill, stood in front of Garush, looking down at the great chief who was shorter than him. Garush already hated the feeling of having to look up to someone. Unexpectedly, Cain was so angry that he sprayed saliva in Garush's face. Any qualified leader with a bit of political sense would never say something like this. However, the reason why Garush was called the brainless roar by many alliances was because of his 5 IQ and his personality of speaking without thinking when he was angry. Garush's first reaction after being spat on was to punch Cain in the bull's mouth. It was a powerful, swift, and ruthless left hook. Every tribe leader present saw that the old bull's slightly long face had been beaten until it was deformed. Even the muscles on the right side of his face had received a fierce blow to his gums. At least 3 of his teeth had been knocked out. His huge teeth flew out of his mouth along with the stench of blood. The old bull was a bit stunned. Then words that made him even angrier rang in his ears. It was Garush's terrifying declaration. Pay attention to your identity. Cain. You Taurens are just vassals of us orcs. The tribe will always be decided by the orcs, and I am the great chief of the orcs. I am also the great chief of the tribe. Those who don't listen to the great chief's orders can die. Cain looked up and was shocked to see Garush making a throat-cutting gesture at him with his thick right thumb. Long-term injustice. Long-term suppressed anger. The humiliation he had suffered during this period of time. Everything was like a volcano that had been suppressed to the extreme and had to erupt. It erupted in Cain's heart. If the Taurens were a race that Thrall had conquered in war, perhaps Cain would choose to lower his head. But that wasn't the case. The tribe used an integration system similar to the Alliance. In the tribe's declaration, the status of the various races was equal. Even though the orcs in the tribe were numerous and powerful, allowing the orcs to occupy an absolute ruling position, the tribe's declaration did state that other races could challenge the Great Chief's ruling authority. At this moment, Cain could no longer care about anything else. The Tauren chief pulled out the flag on his back and threw it in front of Garush. According to the tribe's tradition, I, Cain Bloodhoof, request to challenge you for the position of Great Chief. Come. If you really think you are the tribe's #1 warrior, then accept my Makara. Garush's face turned green and then red. Suddenly, he roared and stomped on one of Qajar's heads. I've had enough. I've had enough. I've had enough of your complaints. I've had enough of your weakness. Why can't you weaklings obediently listen to the orders of the strong? Don't compare me to that weak fellow Thrall. He has already scrammed. Now the great chief of the tribe is me. Garush hell scream. Garush raised his bloody axe high. I accept Cain's challenge. Who else wants to challenge me? Is it you? Is it you? Or is it you? If you want to come, then come at me together. As he spoke, the blade of his axe was first pointed at Cain, then at Wajin, then at Dranos, and finally at the goblin prince Galawex. Wajin was not as impulsive as Cain, but everyone could see that his protruding fangs were trembling with anger. Garush, I don't want to fight with you. When you and Cain's Makara are over, I will make my decision. Wajin clenched his fists tightly. Anyone with a brain knew that unless Garush was completely defeated and Cain replaced him as the new great chief, it would mean that the tribe would split. A week later, at the south gate of Orgrimmar, which was opposite the main gate. It was a huge pit with a diameter of more than a kilometer formed due to the cataclysm. Tens of thousands of tribal warriors formed a huge circle, and at the bottom of the pit were the challengers and the challenged of Makara. Cain was the first to shout, Garush, I will defeat you. Under your leadership, the tribe will surely be destroyed. Ow! Ow! Garush brandished his sharp axe. First, he roared at the sky, showing everyone his amazing lung capacity. The wild and primitive roar even suppressed the sound waves of tens of thousands of people for a moment. Then, the young orcs from Nagrand burst into even more enthusiastic cheers. This was their idol, the strong orc that they dreamed of, the role model. No matter what, the one who could lead them to victory was a great hero. Chapter 1835. Perhaps some people criticized Garrus for sacrificing too many of his compatriots for this war. But in the eyes of the traditional orcs, so what? Those who died were the weak. The weak were not qualified to have glory, power, and land. Garrus! Great hero Garrus! It was an earth-shattering cheer, a wild roar, and the shock of tens of thousands of people worshipping him. Garush raised his arms high. He loved the feeling of standing at the pinnacle of power and glory. He raised his father's single-edged axe, Bloodhowl, and waved it a few times. Although he hated his father, who bowed to the human leader, Duke Marcus, he reluctantly approved of his father's actions. At the same time, he felt that Bloodhowl was indeed useful. Of course, he didn't feel anything about his father using a knockoff version of Bloodhowl that he had gotten from a certain demon prince in Karazhan after someone gave him a family heirloom axe. As for feeling the so-called fatherly love, the brave orcs didn't need fatherly love, at least that was what he thought. Garrus pointed at Cain from afar and shouted, Cain, I'll give you one last chance. Admit your identity as the weak and kneel in front of me. Bah! Don't even think about it. Under your leadership, the horde will only be destroyed. Cain retorted. In the temporary auditorium near the arena, other than Gruul, who had an indifferent expression, the other chiefs all had nervous expressions. Cain's son, Bane, clenched his fists. As the military commander of the horde, Varrock Salyafar didn't want to see this happen, but he knew that the conflict had been completely intensified and could no longer be resolved through dialogue. Makara might be the only way to resolve the dispute outside of a civil war. With a deep sigh,
The white-haired old orc commander raised his right hand high and put it down heavily.
I declare that Cain Bloodhoof's challenge to Gurus Hellscream's Makara begins. The taller and bullier Tauren chief was undoubtedly the strongest MT of the horde. Ever since Sar led the orcs west to the Kalimdor continent, Cain had been active at the forefront of the war. Since the famous Battle of Mount Hyjal, his majestic figure had been imprinted in the eyes of every horde powerhouse, and he had never retreated. His bravery and strength were obvious to all. In fact, as soon as the battle began, he completely overwhelmed Garrosh. Bang! With the exact same fierce charge, the two warrior heroes turned into a stream of light that was hard to be seen by the naked eye and crashed into each other in the middle of the arena. It was the same move, but it was a clash without any fancy tricks. Naturally, the stronger side would win. Facing Cain, who weighed more than a ton and also had innate divine strength, Garrosh was sent flying. Today in the duel, Cain did not use his favorite totem pole. Instead, he used a long axe that was more suitable for his hands. Without giving Garrosh any time to react, Cain activated Spirit's Wrath, and then used Heroic Leap to catch up with Garrosh, who was flying backwards, and swung his axe down. Close combat. An inch shorter was an inch more dangerous. The price of gaining agility was that the side with a longer attack range would have an advantage. Therefore, there was another saying that an inch longer was an inch more powerful. The Oxhead chief was already stronger to begin with.
Coupled with his full strength, the axe that came down from above forced Garrosh to forcefully parry it with Bloodhowl in midair.
Bang! It was a fierce blow that shook the entire arena. Garrosh was sent flying like a cannonball. First, he crashed to the ground. Then his entire body bounced up again under the impact. Finally, he rolled 5 times in a sorry state, plowing a thick line on the thick red ground before he finally stopped. Ah! There was an uproar among the beast men, while the Taurens, Trolls, and Forsaken cheered. Garrosh! Surrender! Cain roared. Garrosh used Bloodhowl to support his body and said angrily, Cain, you've angered me. Then I'll beat you until you submit. Cain rushed over with large strides, raised his battle axe, and launched a fierce attack. It was an unquestionable suppression. In terms of experience, 10 Garrushes could not compare to Cain. In terms of strength and equipment, Cain also completely defeated Garrosh. The Oxhead chief was at the strongest moment of his life. Be it experience or physique, he was at his peak. Compared to him, Garrosh was too inexperienced. At some point in time, the beastmen's cheers had stopped. They stared at the brownish-red figure that was being suppressed with ugly expressions. At this moment, Garrosh was more of a defensive fighter than Cain. Of course, as a member of the Hellscream family, Garrosh had learned 70% to 80% of Lord Howl's jump slash. Seizing an opportunity, Garrosh fiercely counterattacked from the bottom up, finally using his axe to block Cain's battle axe. Garrosh seized the opportunity and jumped high. Because only then could he make up for the difference in height and physique between him and Cain, and better hit Cain's head. He wanted to chop down this Oxhead chief who had embarrassed him. Unfortunately, he was too inexperienced, and the jumping route he chose was not good. Almost at the instant he jumped, Cain's left hand grabbed his leg and slammed him to the ground in a wrestling position. Ah! Garrosh spat out a mouthful of blood from the violent impact with the ground. This was only the beginning. Cain was like a broken cloth bag. He continued to grab Garrosh's foot and continued to smash him violently. Left throw, right throw, left throw, right throw. Cain, who was swinging his arms, directly humiliated the current chief with absolute strength. Garrosh was thrown so hard that the world spun and he could not hold on any longer. At this moment, he waved Bloodhowl randomly, as if he had hit something. That's right. The tip of the axe blade had indeed slashed across Cain's chest. There were over 100 wounds on his body, and Cain, who was injured in almost every battle, did not think much of this injury. However, he immediately realized that his chest was violently numb, followed by an unbearable feeling of suffocation. Cain let go of Garrosh's leg and touched the wound on his chest. He saw that a considerable part of his blood had turned green. He realized what it was. Poison? Cain's eyes widened, and this scene was witnessed by Cain's son, Ben. Just as Cain's entire body was almost paralyzed, the furious Garrosh pounced over. The red battle axe he raised high emitted a demonic scarlet light. "Father, no!" Ben cried out in shock. It was too late. Cain, who was poisoned, could not move at all. As the axe chopped down, thunderous cheers erupted among the orcs. Garush raised Kane's head high and let out a victorious roar.